My name is Thomas. I'm 70 years old, and I'm still struggling to wrap my head around the betrayal of my own blood. As a retired structural engineer, I spent my entire life designing buildings to stand the test of time, never realizing that my own son was secretly calculating a way to bring my world crashing down. 5 months after my wife passed away, I took her broken smart glasses into a local shop for a simple repair. The technician locked his front door, pulled me into the back room, and whispered, "Check your will right now or you're next." I stood there frozen as he played back the chilling footage he'd recovered from those glasses. In that dim room, my grief crystallized into a cold, calculated plan for justice. Before I go on, let me know in the comments where you're watching this from. If you've ever had to stand your ground against family members who underestimated you, hit that like and subscribe button. Now, let me show you how a simple errand uncovered a nightmare. For 40 years here in Chicago, I built structures meant to last for generations. I understand stress fractures, load-bearing walls, and the invisible forces that can bring down a skyscraper. I truly believed my family was built on an unshakable foundation. I gave Martha and our son, Derek, everything. I paid for his Ivy League tuition, funded his and Rachel's lavish wedding, and then stepped back to enjoy my retirement, confident that my legacy was secure. But 5 months ago, that foundation began to crack. Martha was gone. The doctors said it was a sudden, massive heart failure. It happened on a Tuesday evening while I was at a charity board meeting downtown. By the time I rushed home, the first responders were already shaking their heads. Derek and Rachel had stopped by to see her. They told me she'd suddenly grabbed her chest and collapsed, that it happened so fast, there was nothing anyone could do. I accepted it. Death is the one structural failure no engineer can predict or prevent. But toward the end, Martha had been struggling. She was in the early stages of cognitive decline. She'd forget her keys, lose her way during her morning walks, and get frustrated by her fading memory. To help her keep her independence, I bought her a pair of custom smart glasses. They looked like regular frames, but they had a discrete camera built in. The idea was to track her daily routes and sync them to a private cloud so if she ever got lost, she could literally retrace her steps. That night, the paramedics handed me her personal belongings in a plastic bag. Her wedding ring, her watch, and those glasses. The right lens was shattered from the impact when she fell. For months, I couldn't bring myself to look at them. The grief was a physical weight, so suffocating that I avoided anything that reminded me she was gone. Yesterday morning, I finally found the courage to open that bag. I decided to get the glasses fixed as a keepsake. I drove to a small tech repair shop run by Leo Mitchell. Leo is a bright kid, a software wizard I've known since he was a teenager. When his own father walked out on him, I helped pay for his college, and he's always treated Martha and me like family. When I walked into his shop, cluttered with electronics, the bell above the door chimed. Leo looked up from his workbench and smiled. I handed him the glasses, explaining that I just wanted the lens replaced and the memory cleared so I could put them away. I expected him to take them, give me a receipt, and tell me to come back tomorrow. But the second Leo saw the serial number on those frames, his entire demeanor shifted. The smile vanished. He went pale, his eyes wide. He glanced over my shoulder toward the street, as if checking to see if I was being followed. Without a word, he walked past me, flipped the sign to closed, pulled the heavy security shutters down over the glass, and deadbolted the door. A heavy, echoing click filled the shop. "What's going on, Leo?" I asked, my voice tight with confusion. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me into the back room where he kept his servers. He shut the door behind us, leaving the small room in shadows, lit only by the glow of his monitors. He looked at me, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he held Martha's glasses. "Mr. Caldwell," he whispered, his voice trembling. You need to check your wife's will immediately or you're the next one on the list. I stared at him, my brain refusing to process the words. I'm next, I asked. What does that mean? What are you talking about? Leo didn't answer. He sat at his terminal, plugged a specialized cable into the hidden port on the glasses, and began typing furiously. He explained that a few weeks after Martha died, he'd run a routine diagnostic on his own cloud server, the one hosting her backup data. He'd noticed a massive anomaly. Right around the time of her passing, there had been a major file corruption. Someone had tried to wipe the memory on the glasses and the cloud backup simultaneously, but they were sloppy. They didn't know Leo had a hidden recovery directory built into the hardware. When he hit enter, I froze. A progress bar flashed on the screen, piecing together the fragmented data. I managed to reconstruct the original video file from the physical memory cache in the frames, Leo said, his voice barely audible. I didn't know what to do. I was too scared to call you. I didn't know who to trust. Just look. The screen flickered to life. It was a first-person perspective, recorded directly from the camera on the bridge of Martha's nose. The timestamp in the corner confirmed it was the exact date and time she died. The video was shaky, but the resolution was sharp. I was seeing the world through my late wife's eyes. She was in our kitchen. I saw her weak, trembling hands reaching for the marble countertop. I heard her sharp, shallow breathing as she gasped for air. It was the terrifying sound of a woman suffering an acute medical emergency. As Martha collapsed to the hardwood floor, the angle of the camera tilted downward violently. The impact cracked the lens, leaving a jagged, spiderweb-like fissure across the left side of the screen. Through that broken view, two pairs of shoes walked into frame. One pair was expensive, polished Italian leather loafers, the other, designer heels. I looked up and my breath caught in my throat. Standing directly over my dying wife were my son, Derek, and his wife, Rachel. They weren't panicking. They weren't reaching for a phone to call for help. They didn't kneel down to assist her. They just stood there, looking down at her with a calm that was absolutely bone-chilling. Martha let out a desperate wheeze. Her hand raised weakly, pointing toward the counter. Her voice was faint, heartbreakingly thin. "Meds," she whispered. "My meds." Rachel stepped forward. Her perfectly manicured hands reached out, took the small orange bottle of Martha's heart medication from the counter, and just turned around, placing the pills somewhere completely out of her reach. Derek crouched down. His face filled the camera's view. My own flesh and blood, the boy I had raised and protected, was looking into his dying mother's eyes with a cold, empty stare. He leaned in, his lips parted, appearing ready to speak. But before he could get a single word out, the video glitched violently. The image dissolved into a mess of digital noise and static, then went completely black. I stood in that dark room, my lungs burning. I had stopped breathing. The silence in the repair shop was deafening, broken only by the hum of the computer servers. "The video cuts out right there," Leo whispered. "The impact of the fall damaged the drive, and whoever tried to wipe the data corrupted the audio and the final seconds. The encryption is deep. I've been running algorithms for weeks, but I need more time to recover the rest of the file and clean up the audio so we can hear exactly what he said." A storm of chaos was swirling in my head. The structural integrity of my entire reality had just been shattered. My wife didn't just die of a heart attack. She was murdered by our own son and his wife. They stood there, watching her suffocate, withholding the medicine that could have saved her life. And now they were pretending to mourn. Why, I thought my fists clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. Why would they do this? "Check the will," Leo had said. "Or you're next." Suddenly, the jarring ring of my phone cut through the tension. I jumped, pulling it from my pocket. The caller ID glowed brightly in the dim light. It was Derek. I stared at his name on the screen, the name of the man standing over my dying wife. My thumb hovered over the answer button. I took a deep breath, forcing that rage into a cold, locked box deep inside my chest. I answered, pressing the phone to my ear. "Hey, Dad," Derek's voice came through the speaker. It was sickeningly sweet, dripping with that fake, practiced warmth he used with clients. "Rachel and I are on our way to the house. We need to take you to the lawyer to sign those power of attorney papers. Your memory has been slipping lately, Dad. You need us to step in and handle everything. See you in 20 minutes." He hung up before I could say a word. I stared at the dark screen. The puzzle pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. My son had killed his mother, and now he was coming for me. I slid the phone into my pocket. The cold metal helped me anchor against the storm raging in my chest. I looked at Leo. The young man was pale, his eyes full of fear. I placed a steady, firm hand on his shoulder to let him know I was in control. "Keep working on decoding that audio," I told him, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "Back everything up to a secure offline drive and don't answer the phone for anyone but me. I'll handle my son." I stepped out of the shop and into the crisp autumn air. I had exactly 15 minutes before they arrived. As a structural engineer, I spent 40 years assessing massive physical loads, calculating exactly how much relentless pressure a steel support beam could take before it finally snapped. Now I had to apply that same cold, ruthless math to my own mind. I couldn't let the grief or the blinding rage show. I had to become the man they thought I was, a weak, confused, heartbroken old man whose mind was slipping into the fog. I let my shoulders slump, completely changing my posture. I slowed my breathing, making it shallow and slightly labored. I relaxed my facial muscles, letting an empty, bewildered look wash over my features. Right on time, a black luxury SUV pulled to the curb. The tinted passenger window rolled down, revealing Derek in the driver's seat, his hands tight on the leather-stitched steering wheel. He was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his hair styled to perfection, looking exactly like the high-powered investment banker he wanted the world to see. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, turning to give me a bright, rehearsed smile that made my stomach churn with absolute disgust. "Oh, Dad, we're just so worried about you," Rachel cooed, quickly pushing open the heavy car door. She stepped onto the sidewalk and gently helped me toward the vehicle. "Why were you walking around this busy downtown area all by yourself? You know you've been losing your way so easily lately." I let my hands tremble slightly as I reached out to take her arm. "I was just getting your mother's glasses fixed," I muttered, intentionally slurring my words just enough to sell the performance. "I thought maybe she'd want them back." Rachel and Derek exchanged a lightning-fast, telling glance, the kind that screamed, "This old man is losing his grip." She guided me into the spacious backseat as if I were a fragile piece of antique glass already cracked under immense pressure. Derek pulled the massive SUV away from the curb and merged seamlessly into the dense afternoon traffic. He adjusted the rearview mirror, just enough to maintain direct eye contact while he drove. He had always been a silver-tongued orator, a master negotiator capable of selling toxic financial assets to wealthy clients who didn't know any better. Now he was ruthlessly applying those same manipulative tactics from the boardroom to his own father. "Dad, we really need to sit down and talk about the future," Derek began, his tone dripping with fake concern. "I reviewed the estate documents with the legal team this morning. Mom's final medical bills are incredibly complex. These huge invoices from the hospital don't make any sense, and the insurance company is giving us the runaround. It's quickly becoming a massive administrative headache for everyone involved." I stared blankly out the tinted window, careful to keep my expression completely empty and dull. "Bills?" I said, my voice sounding distant and thoroughly confused. "I can just write a check, Derek. We have enough in the accounts. We don't need to worry about medical expenses." "That is exactly the root of the problem, Dad," Derek said smoothly, tapping his fingers idly against the steering wheel. You have $40 million spread across various trust accounts, real estate, and liquid assets. It's a massive, highly complex portfolio. But with Mom not here to legally co-manage things, the upcoming tax liability is going to be an absolute disaster. Honestly, Dad, Rachel and I are getting more and more worried about you living alone in that big house. Worried about me? I asked, letting my frail voice project a perfect sense of pathetic helplessness. Rachel turned fully in her seat, placing her perfectly manicured hand affectionately on my knee. Yes, Thomas, she said softly. Her voice was like smooth velvet covering broken glass. You haven't been yourself since Martha passed. You forget things constantly. You wander off without telling anyone. This intense grief is taking a terrible, visible toll on your cognitive health. We just want to protect you. There are so many cold-hearted scammers out there, just looking for vulnerable seniors like you who have a massive, unprotected estate. We just couldn't bear to see anyone take advantage of you while you're this fragile. The suffocating hypocrisy behind her empty words almost made me break character. They were the cold-hearted scammers. They were the predators in the car. But I just nodded slowly, looking down at my visibly shaking hands. What do you want me to do? I asked softly, playing the role of the broken victim perfectly. It's simple, Dad, Derek replied immediately, a wave of fake relief washing over his voice. We're heading to the lawyer's office now to have you sign a comprehensive power of attorney. It just gives me the legal authority to seamlessly and properly handle all the complex financial matters, manage the trusts, and deal with those endless hospital billing departments. You won't have to worry about a single difficult thing ever again. You can just rest at home and focus entirely on your health. We'll carry this heavy burden for you. It was a meticulously constructed, absolute lie. To any outsider, they looked like a perfect, devoted family gracefully stepping up to lovingly care for an ailing, grieving patriarch. But I knew exactly what that binding legal document was. It was a blank check. The moment my signature hit that paper, Derek would have unrestricted, unquestionable access to legally liquidate every financial asset I'd spent my life building. Rachel reached down to the floor and pulled out a sleek silver thermos. She carefully unscrewed the lid, letting a rich, fragrant steam fill the climate-controlled cabin. Here, Thomas, she whispered affectionately, leaning gracefully over the center console to hand me a small travel mug. This is a herbal tea I brewed myself this morning before leaving. It's the exact same soothing formula I used to make for Martha whenever she felt overwhelmed or anxious. It will really help calm your nerves and clear up that nasty cognitive fog you've been struggling with lately. Drink it all while it's still hot. I took the warm mug from her steady hand. My own fingers were shaking violently, and this time the tremor wasn't an act. It was pure, unadulterated, sickening revulsion. I stared straight into the dark, murky liquid swirling in the small metal cup. The scent of strong chamomile and fresh mint did a poor job of masking another dark presence lurking beneath the warmth, a subtle, unsettling heaviness and a distinct metallic tang. You really should drink it, Dad, Derek urged firmly, his calculating eyes never leaving the busy road ahead. Rachel spent all morning preparing it for you. It's a huge help for your cognitive stability. You know you need it. I slowly brought the thin rim of the hot cup to my cracked lips, fully pretending to take a small sip, but I kept my mouth tightly sealed. When Derek took an aggressive, sharp turn at a busy downtown intersection, he cursed loudly at a passing commercial delivery truck, his attention completely diverted by the heavy traffic. Seizing the fleeting opportunity, I intentionally gave my right wrist a sharp, violent shake. A large splash of the hot tea spilled over the rim of the mug, landing squarely on the heavy-duty floor mat beneath my expensive leather shoes. I looked down at the dark, steaming puddle. Almost instantly, A faint but undeniable chemical hiss echoed in the quiet, enclosed footwell of the luxury car. The high-rebound synthetic rubber of the expensive mat began to discolor rapidly and significantly, turning a sickly, mottled shade of pale yellow, right where the toxic liquid had pooled. A chilling, undeniable realization hit me like a heavy weight in my chest. My beautiful, brilliant wife didn't die of natural, unavoidable causes. In the 5 months leading up to her sudden heart failure, she had suffered from extreme neurological decline, severe and unexplainable joint pain, and deep, debilitating brain fog. Those symptoms matched the ones I had been experiencing for the past 5 months. They had conveniently, constantly blamed my symptoms on my old age and my intense, blinding grief. I hadn't lost my analytical edge. I wasn't dying of a broken heart. I was being carefully, intentionally, and systematically poisoned by them. The rest of the drive passed in a suffocating blur. I kept my breathing shallow, my brain running complex calculations to keep my hands from reaching across the console to wrap around my son's throat. They were murdering me, slowly and methodically, just as they had done to Martha. Every bitter sip of tea, every tender touch on my shoulder, was a calculated step in my own execution. Derek steered the heavy car into a rundown commercial plaza on the edge of the financial district. I looked up at the low-slung, weathered brick building wedged between a failing dry cleaner and a cheap liquor store. The fading gold lettering on the glass door read, Maxwell Law Offices. This was certainly not the pristine, high-rise office where Gregory Barnes, my trusted estate lawyer, worked. Gregory had managed my family trusts for 30 years. He was a shark in a custom suit who scrutinized every single piece of punctuation. Derek knew Gregory would never have allowed a transfer of power without intense cross-examination. So, my son bypassed the family lawyer for a bottom-tier opportunist looking for a quick payday. I stumbled slightly as I got out of the car, leaning heavily against the doorframe. Rachel was at my side instantly, gripping my elbow. We walked into a cramped reception area that smelled of stale coffee. A man in an ill-fitting gray suit waited behind a cluttered desk, wearing a slick, oily smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Caldwell," the lawyer said, extending a cold, damp hand. "I'm Richard Maxwell. Derek has told me so much about you. We just need to execute a few standard documents today to ease your administrative burden." I nodded slowly, offering a shaky handshake. They guided me into a small conference room. Derek pulled out a chair and kept his hands firmly on my shoulders as I sat down. Maxwell pushed a thick stack of stapled documents across the scratched wood table. "This is a durable power of attorney," Maxwell explained, tapping the signature line with a cheap plastic pen. "It gives your son immediate legal authority to consolidate your bank accounts, liquidate stock assets, and manage any ongoing medical or tax liabilities. Given your declining health, this ensures your massive estate is completely protected." I stared down at the dense legal jargon. This was a death warrant. The moment I signed my name, Derek could digitally wire my life savings, all $40 million, to any offshore account he wanted. He could drain my retirement, leaving me penniless long before the poison finished its terrible work. I reached out a trembling hand, letting my fingers hover indecisively above the pen. Derek leaned in close, his breath coming in short bursts of suppressed anticipation. "Just sign at the bottom, Dad," he urged softly. "Right next to that blue sticker." I picked up the pen. The tip touched the paper. Then I let out a violent, rattling cough. I slumped over in the chair, coughing uncontrollably and pressing my forearm to my mouth. I let the pen slide from my fingers, watching it clatter onto the floor. Rachel quickly handed me a tissue, her face a mask of manufactured concern. I gasped for air, playing the part of an exhausted, dying old man to perfection. "So sorry," I whispered, rubbing my chest. "My chest is just so tight today." I looked down at the documents, squinting as if the text were blurry. Derek, I can't read a word of this. I must have left my reading glasses on the kitchen counter at home. Maxwell frowned, looking nervously at my son. Mr. Caldwell, you don't actually need to read the fine print. I've already summarized the gist for you. This is completely standard boilerplate text. I shook my head stubbornly, clumsily pushing the thick stack of papers away. No, I muttered, slurring slightly. Martha always told me, never sign anything I can't see with my own eyes. I'll take these home. I'll look them over carefully this long weekend when my head is a bit clearer. We can come back next week. A deafening silence suddenly filled the room, thick enough to cut with a knife. I looked up, letting my blank gaze wander to my son. Derek was staring at me intensely, and for one terrifying second, his carefully crafted mask slipped. The veins in his neck bulged, and his jaw was clenched so tightly in pure, unadulterated rage that I could hear his teeth grinding. He looked at me like a trapped wild animal that was actively ruining a lucrative slaughter. He wanted to grab my hand and force the pen across the paper. "Dad," Derek began, his voice tight and dangerously low, "we really need to get this finalized today. The tax deadline is right around the corner." Before he could snap, Rachel moved smoothly in front of him, placing a restraining hand firmly on his chest. She flashed me that sickening, patient smile, which had absolutely no warmth in it. "Of course, Thomas," Rachel coaxed gently, collecting the documents and sliding them neatly into a manila folder. "You should absolutely take your time. There's no rush at all. We want you to feel completely comfortable with everything. Derek is just a bit stressed about the upcoming hospital bills. That's all." Derek swallowed his visible rage, offering a stiff, awkward nod. "Yeah, that's right. Sorry, Dad. Take the weekend to look it over. We'll review it together on Monday." They drove me back to my spacious, empty home in near total silence. The tension radiating from the front seat was palpable. I clutched the manila folder to my chest, a physical shield against their silent, deadly desperation. Every mile confirmed my brutal reality. The clock was ticking. They were desperate for the money, and my stubborn refusal to sign had significantly accelerated their lethal timeline. When we finally pulled into my long, well-swept driveway, Rachel unbuckled her seatbelt and turned toward me with a smile of unwavering, deep concern. "Thomas, I'm actually planning to stay in the guest room tonight," she announced smoothly. "You were coughing so hard in that office, and you look extremely frail today. I really want to make you a hot, nutritious dinner and make absolutely sure you're properly looked after tonight. I would never forgive myself if you fell or had a medical emergency while you were all alone." My stomach twisted into knots. She wasn't staying to care for me. She was staying to monitor me. She was staying to ensure I ingested the daily lethal dose of whatever poison she was slowly feeding me. "You're so kind, Rachel," I whispered weakly, letting her help me out of the car. Later that night, after a quiet, heavily supervised dinner, I retreated to my private study. I sat in my large leather armchair, staring blankly at the dark mahogany desk. Rachel knocked softly and walked in, carrying a small silver tray. On it was a steaming cup of her signature herbal tea and a small, unmarked white pill. "Derek called your doctor this afternoon, Thomas." She lied effortlessly, handing me the pill. "He prescribed a new, high-concentration vitamin supplement to help strengthen your heart and clear up that nasty brain fog. You need to swallow it immediately, and then drink the tea down to the last drop so you can get a long, restful sleep." I looked at the pill resting quietly in my palm. It was perfectly smooth, without any pharmaceutical markings, a silent, untraceable weapon. I gave her a weak, grateful nod and raised my hand to my mouth. I tilted my head back and tossed the pill into my mouth, but skillfully tucked it deep beneath my tongue. I picked up a glass of water from the desk and swallowed a convincing mouthful. "There," I said, managing a weary, raspy sigh. "All gone." Rachel smiled, her eyes fixed on that steaming cup of tea. "Drink up," she urged softly. "I'll be just outside in the hallway if you need absolutely anything." She turned and walked slowly out of the study, leaving the heavy wooden door ajar, leaving a sliver of an opening so she could eavesdrop. The moment her footsteps drifted slightly down the hall, I moved with swift, silent precision. I spat the half-dissolved, bitter pill into a thick tissue and tucked it deep into my trouser pocket. I grabbed the cup of toxic, hot tea and moved silently across the thick Persian rug toward the door. Just outside the study, elegantly placed in the long, shadowy corridor, was a massive decorative fern. I peered carefully through the crack in the doorway to ensure Rachel had fully disappeared into the far-off kitchen. With a steady, composed motion, I poured every drop of the steaming liquid from the mug directly into the soil deep within the large ceramic pot. The dark liquid quickly soaked into the earth and vanished. I carefully wiped the rim of the ceramic cup, walked slowly back to the desk, and sat down in absolute silence, now fully prepared to wage a war of total destruction. I opened my eyes in the pale morning light, filtering through the heavy bedroom curtains. For the first time in 5 months, when I lifted my head from the pillow, the surrounding world didn't spin into a dizzying, nauseating blur. I lay motionless on the mattress, taking slow, deep breaths, taking stock of every joint and muscle in my aging body. The constant, crippling pain in my knees, the heavy stiffness in my shoulders, and the suffocating brain fog that had relentlessly shrouded my daily thoughts were all noticeably receding. It wasn't a miraculous recovery, but the sudden disappearance of that oppressive physical weight was undeniable. Just skipping one of Rachel's custom, homemade herbal teas had been enough to give my body a moment of true, desperate clarity. I sat up slowly on the edge of the bed, my feet planted firmly on the hardwood floor. My legs didn't shake violently. When I held my hands out before me, they were perfectly steady. The terrifying reality of my situation washed over me again, cold and sharp. Everything I had felt, the weakness, the confusion, the sudden inability to remember simple daily tasks, it was all a meticulously crafted illusion. They were intentionally dismantling the structure of my body, day after day, microgram by microgram, ensuring my inevitable collapse looked like nothing more than the tragic, natural decline of a grieving, heartbroken old man. They had done the exact same thing to Martha. They watched her slowly wither away, offering fake smiles and poisonous tea until her heart finally gave out under the immense pressure. I stood up, my spine straight, fueled by a reignited, dangerous sense of purpose. I dressed quietly, choosing simple slacks and a comfortable sweater, maintaining the visual illusion of a frail, defeated old man. I opened the bedroom door and stepped into the long, quiet corridor leading to the main living area. The house was dead silent, save for the faint, muffled sound of conversation drifting up from the kitchen downstairs. As I walked down the hall, I stopped outside the door to my private study. My gaze fell on the massive decorative fern in the corner. Just last night, it had been a vibrant, thriving plant with bright green leaves reaching toward the ceiling. Now, it stood as a horrific monument to my son's absolute betrayal. The entire plant was dead. The lush, healthy leaves had withered into dry, brittle husks. The stems were violently blackened and curled inward, as if scorched by an invisible chemical fire. The dark, fertile soil at the bottom of the heavy ceramic pot, the very place I had poured the steaming contents of Rachel's mug, was stained a sickly, unnatural shade of pale yellow. The level of toxicity required to completely annihilate a resilient, fully mature plant in mere hours was shivering. If I had swallowed that pill and drunk that tea last night, I wouldn't have woken up this morning. I would have been just another tragic case of sudden heart failure, another convenient tragedy for Derek and Rachel to mourn, tearfully, at an expensive funeral. I stared at the blackened, dead leaves, feeling that the place where my fatherly love once resided now held only a cold, empty abyss. The boy I taught to ride a bike, the son I proudly watched graduate, he didn't exist anymore. He had been entirely replaced by a cold, greedy predator, and I would treat him exactly as a predator. I continued down the wide staircase, carefully gripping the wooden banister, intentionally slowing my pace to mimic a heavy, weary, dragging gait. I walked into the sunny kitchen. Derek was sitting at the marble island, wearing a crisp navy suit, typing furiously on his sleek laptop. His expensive leather briefcase sat on the counter right next to him. Rachel was standing by the stove, cheerfully stirring a pot of oatmeal, humming a soft, pleasant melody as if she hadn't been quietly attempting to murder her father-in-law 12 hours prior. "Good morning, Thomas." Rachel turned around buoyantly with a dazzling, practiced smile. "Did you sleep well? I kept listening for you, but the house was dead silent. You must have been completely exhausted." I gave her a weak, completely hollow nod. "I slept very soundly, Rachel," I muttered, keeping my voice barely audible. "That cup of herbal tea you made me was absolutely miraculous. I feel like I didn't move a single muscle all night long." Rachel exchanged a very quick, extremely satisfied glance with Derek. Derek looked up from his bright screen and gave me a stiff, completely unsympathetic smile. "Glad to hear that, Dad. We really need you to get some good rest and regain your strength. We have to go back to the lawyer's office on Monday to get those documents finalized. Administrative delays are becoming incredibly frustrating." Before I could come up with a pathetic, obedient response, Derek's phone suddenly began to buzz violently on the marble countertop. He glanced down at the glowing screen, and his confident, arrogant posture vanished instantly. His face went completely pale, and pure, undisguised panic flashed wildly in his eyes. He grabbed the phone as if the thing were scorching hot. "I have to take this," Derek stammered, his voice tight and unnatural. He shoved his chair back and ran, almost sprinting toward the glass patio door leading to the backyard. Rachel watched the stove. He went outside, pulled the heavy glass door shut tight, and paced frantically on the wooden deck while holding the phone to his ear. Rachel frowned, clearly annoyed by his suddenly chaotic departure, and turned her attention back to the bubbling oatmeal on the hot stove. "Oh my God, we are completely out of almond milk. Would you like some in yours, Thomas?" she sighed with exaggerated frustration. "Let me go to the basement pantry and grab a fresh carton. I'll be right back." "Don't touch the hot stove." She wiped her hands with a towel and walked quickly toward the basement stairs. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, leaving me completely alone in the spacious kitchen. I looked out the glass door. Derek was pacing furiously at the edge of the pool, running his free hand aggressively through his perfectly styled hair, his face contorted by a desperate, frenzied conversation. He was completely distracted, utterly consumed by a catastrophe unfolding on the other end of the phone line. I turned my gaze back to the kitchen counter. Derek's expensive leather briefcase with the combination lock was sitting there quietly, completely unattended. My engineering background required me to understand the complex mechanical vulnerabilities of countless physical security systems. The standard 3-digit combination lock on a consumer-grade leather briefcase is extremely primitive. It's a simple mechanical device that relies on tiny internal tension pins. I struck with swift, silent precision, instantly shedding the disguise of a frail old man. I walked to the counter, reached into my pocket, and pulled out a small, sturdy metal paperclip I always carried. I quickly bent the thick wire straight, creating a rigid makeshift tension tool. I slid the metal tip directly into the tiny gap beside the first number dial, applying steady, even pressure to the internal locking mechanism. I slowly rotated the dial with my thumb, feeling for the microscopic mechanical click that indicated the internal pin was aligning with the opening groove. Click. I moved to the second dial and repeated the delicate, precise process. Click. The third dial rotated smoothly, falling into place with a final, satisfying, crisp sound. I pressed the brass release button, and the heavy leather flap of the briefcase popped open. I didn't waste a single second. I bypassed the shiny marketing brochures, the thick financial portfolios, and the expensive pens, going straight to the back compartment. My fingers touched a thick stack of high-quality legal paper wrapped in a striking blue cover. I pulled it out and scanned the bold, capitalized text printed on the first page. It was a copy of a highly modified, legally notarized version of the Martha Caldwell Irrevocable Trust Agreement. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. This was a master document, the absolute financial core of my entire $40 million estate. My real lawyer, Gregory Barnes, kept the original copy safe in his firm's vault. Clearly, Derek had hired that sleazy lawyer downtown and drafted a series of aggressive, highly illegal amendments to the trust structure, entirely bypassing the established legal protections I had put in place decades ago. I flipped rapidly through the dense, thick pages, scanning the complex legal jargon with the meticulous eyes of someone trained to read dense structural blueprints for 40 years. I skipped over the standard asset allocation clauses and real estate holdings, searching specifically for newly added amendments. In the final section of the massive document, I found it, a brand new and highlighted section that absolutely should not have been there. It was clearly marked as Section 4B, Contingency Clause for Spousal Survivorship. I slid my finger down the page, reading the freshly printed text. The blood in my veins turned to absolute ice. The meticulously constructed legal wording was undeniably clear, designed to brutally strip away every single protective barrier my estate possessed. I leaned in closer, my eyes locking onto the final, devastating sentence of Section 4B. I stared down at the crisp white paper, my eyes tracking the heavy black ink of Section 4B. The dense legalese masked a brutally clear contingency clause, twisted to serve a greedy purpose. Our trust stipulated that I retained control of the $40 million estate, with the remainder to be donated to medical charities. But Derek had hollowed out our estate. Section 4B stated that if I died within 6 months of Martha's passing, the charitable donations would be rendered completely void, and the entire $40 million estate would be transferred, 100%, directly to Derek. He knew a power of attorney could be legally challenged. He wanted permanent, unquestionable legal ownership. He needed me to disappear completely. My hands braced firmly against the cold granite edge of the kitchen island. I lifted my eyes, past the modern stainless steel appliances, to the large digital calendar hanging on the wall oven panel. My brain, trained for decades to instantly calculate precise structural loads, ran the terrifying mathematical formula of my impending death. It had been 5 months and 2 weeks since Martha passed. The 6-month anniversary of her murder was exactly 14 days away. A chilling clarity washed over me, erasing any trace of denial in my fatherly love. This wasn't a vague, open-ended plan to slowly drain my accounts. This was a highly calculated, meticulously orchestrated execution on a schedule. Derek and Rachel were operating on a strict, ruthless timeline. Every bitter cup of herbal tea they shoved into my hand, every unmarked vitamin pill, was perfectly dosed to ensure my body suffered massive, catastrophic failure before that 2-week deadline expired. They needed my heart to stop beating before mid-April. If I managed to survive past that 6-month mark, the original charitable clauses in the trust would be permanently locked into place, cutting Derek off from the $40 million windfall he desperately needed to pay off his illegal offshore debts. They were holding a stopwatch, waiting for the heavy metal thallium toxin to accumulate in my blood eagerly anticipating the moment I finally collapsed onto the hardwood floor, just like his mother. I took a slow, deep breath, sealing my profound, blinding rage behind an impenetrable wall of mental discipline. I had 14 days to turn their lethal trap back onto them. 14 days to systematically dismantle my son's entire life. Suddenly, the heavy glass patio door rattled violently on its metal track. Heavy footsteps rang out aggressively on the wooden deck outside. Derek was back. His phone conversation ended abruptly, and his figure moved rapidly toward the kitchen entrance. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. I had less than 2 seconds to ensure the evidence was secure. I quickly stuffed the thick legal documents back into the hidden rear compartment of the leather briefcase. I perfectly folded the marketing brochures on top, reconstructing the messy, unorganized arrangement Derek had left. With swift, precise movements, I pressed down the heavy leather flap. The brass latch clicked shut just as the glass door was shoved open. Derek strode into the kitchen, his face flushed red, his expensive tie loosened at his neck. He practically threw his phone onto the dining table, radiating a highly unstable, neurotic energy. His sharp eyes immediately shot toward the kitchen island. He stopped dead in his tracks. I was standing too close to his briefcase. My hands were hovering just inches away from the polished brass latch. The tension in the room spiked instantly. The air became unbelievably thick and suffocating. Derek's posture shifted, his shoulders tensed, and he took a slow, extremely calculated step toward me. The mask of the loving, concerned son evaporated completely, replaced by the cold, calculating glare of a predator protecting a lethal secret. "What are you doing?" Derek demanded, his voice devoid of any warmth, flat and extremely dangerous. "Why are you hovering over my bag?" I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I relied on 40 years of experience sitting across from aggressive, hostile contractors. I let my shoulders slump instantly, letting a soft, empty expression wash over my face. I raised my hand to my forehead, rubbing my temples as if I were plunged into deep, extreme confusion. "I was just looking for the sugar bowl, Derek," I muttered, slurring my words slightly, making my voice sound extremely weak and completely lost. "I wanted to put some sugar in my tea. Your wife made me a nice cup, but it was just so bitter today. I can't seem to remember where Martha keeps the sugar bowl anymore. Everything in this kitchen seems to be changing locations." Derek stared at me with intense, sharp scrutiny. He analyzed every line on my face, searching frantically for any tiny crack in my performance. He looked down at the locked briefcase, then back up at my trembling hands. I gave him a pathetic, helpless smile, blinking slowly as if the bright lights of the kitchen were stinging my weary eyes. Slowly, that aggressive tension drained from his stiff posture. He bought it. He sincerely believed he was looking at a broken, rapidly failing old man whose brain was rotting from grief and aging. "The sugar is in the pantry, Dad," Derek said, his voice returning to that sickeningly sweet, condescending tone. "It's in the same place it's always been. Why don't you go sit in the living room? You look extremely tired. I'll have Rachel get it out for you." I nodded weakly, dragging my feet across the floor in a painful, exaggeratedly slow movement toward the hallway. I kept my head down, playing the tragic role of the defeated patriarch to absolute perfection. As I reached the edge of the kitchen, the basement door opened. Rachel walked back in, holding a fresh carton of almond milk. She looked at Derek, sensing the lingering, heavy tension in the air. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. I stopped outside the archway, completely out of their sight but close enough to hear their lowered, secret conversation. "He was just hovering by the island looking for sugar," Derek muttered, letting out a heavy, extremely frustrated sigh. "His mind is completely gone, Rachel. He doesn't even know where he is half the time." "But we're running out of time. That call from my boss was extremely bad. They're demanding the money by the end of the month, or they're coming for me. We can't afford to wait for his heart to just slowly fail on its own." I heard the soft sound of clothing rubbing as Rachel walked closer to her husband. "I know," she replied in a low voice, completely devoid of any human empathy. "The tea is working, but he's been stubbornly resilient. I'll handle it. When I make his dinner tonight, we need to completely double the dose. We'll significantly increase his daily dosage, and this whole damn problem will be finished by the weekend." I stood in the dark hallway, holding my breath, my back pressed hard against the cold, plaster wall. Derek and Rachel continued their low-voiced, serpentine conversation in the kitchen, completely unaware that their execution schedule had just been brutally exposed. I waited until the sound of Derek's leather shoes moved toward the front door, followed immediately by the sound of Rachel's high heels. I heard the friction of coats being grabbed, and then the heavy oak door slammed shut. The deadbolt engaged automatically, locking me inside. In the deafening silence of the house I had built with my own hands, I was finally alone. I stepped out of the deep shadows and walked straight to my private study. I took the crumpled tissue out of my pocket. Inside, the dissolved white pill had dried into a thick, chalky residue. Next, I walked over to the ruined fern. I reached into the blackened branches, broke off a few dead stems, and dug up a handful of yellowed soil. I put the toxic plant material into a sealed plastic bag along with the tissue. My hands were now extremely steady. The trembling weakness was gone, replaced by cold, mechanical precision. I was no longer a grieving widower. I was an engineer investigating a catastrophic failure. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. I drove my ordinary sedan, passing those towering downtown hospitals. I needed absolute caution. As a structural engineer, I had spent a lifetime dissecting catastrophic material failures, isolating the exact point where a solid beam yielded to pressure. Now, I was applying that same clinical methodology to my own blood kin. I drove toward a hidden, unmarked glass building tucked away in the wealthy northern suburbs. It was a high-end private analytical laboratory that catered to corporate clients for independent chemical testing in industrial litigation. I walked into the pristine, sterile lobby and approached the front desk. I didn't provide my name or any personal medical history. I placed the sealed bag on the white counter and demanded an immediate, comprehensive toxicology screening. The receptionist blinked and quoted a standard processing time of 3 to 5 business days. I took out my checkbook and wrote a number that was exactly 4 times their standard rush fee. I told her I needed a detailed molecular breakdown report of every compound present in the pill residue and the soil before the sun went down today. Money eliminated bureaucratic friction. The receptionist called for a senior chemist who nodded solemnly and accepted the samples. I sat in the quiet waiting room for 3 agonizing hours, calculating the exact trajectory of my son's elaborate ruse in my head. Finally, the heavy glass door leading to the internal security lab clicked open. A senior analytical chemist, a man in his 50s with extremely weary eyes and a crisp white lab coat, silently signaled for me to follow him into his office. He shut the sturdy door tight, ensuring the electronic lock engaged with a sharp *click*. He sat down heavily behind a modern desk and slid a thick, freshly printed diagnostic report across the smooth glass surface. The detailed document was filled with complex chemical spectrographs and severe warning markers indicating extreme toxicity. "You requested a comprehensive molecular breakdown," the chemist began, his voice tight with professional concern. "The white residue in the tissue is a highly concentrated, unregulated synthetic sedative. It's a powerful central nervous system depressant designed to induce extreme drowsiness, severe cognitive confusion, and deep physical weakness. It perfectly mimics the natural symptoms of late-stage dementia or rapid neurological decline in elderly patients. I nodded slowly, my jaw clenched tight. "And the soil sample?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. The chemist took a deep breath, looking at me with a mix of deep pity and absolute horror. "The soil is completely saturated with a heavy metal compound known as thallium," he said grimly. "It's tasteless, completely odorless, and extremely lethal even in microscopic doses. Historically, it has been darkly known as the poisoner's poison, because it is almost impossible to detect in standard blood tests without specialized, highly targeted screening. It aggressively attacks the central nervous system and cardiovascular muscles. Over time, the slow accumulation of thallium causes severe joint pain, deep brain fog, and eventually, sudden, completely catastrophic cardiac arrest. It leaves almost no visible traces in a standard hospital autopsy. The victim just looks like they suffered a fatal heart attack." As the horrific, undeniable truth etched itself into my bones, the sterile walls of the lab seemed to close in on me. The puzzle was complete. Every agonizing symptom of the past 5 months, the debilitating fatigue, the terrifying memory lapses, the days I couldn't even manage the stairs in my own home, was manufactured. Derek and Rachel had been feeding me a calculated cocktail of daily sedatives to mask the slow-acting heavy metal that was actively dismantling my cardiovascular system. The darkest, most devastating realization of my life hit me like a physical blow. Martha, my beautiful, vibrant, loving wife, didn't die of a sudden, unavoidable medical tragedy. She had suffered the exact same severe joint pain. She had endured the exact same terrifying brain fog. They had systematically poisoned her, watching her waste away while serving her toxic herbal tea with a bright, loving smile, until her heart finally gave out under the immense pressure. They murdered the woman I cherished simply to trigger a financial contingency clause in a massive legal trust. And now, operating within a strict 2-week deadline, they were ready to double my dosage to finish the job and claim their blood-stained inheritance. The chemist leaned forward, breaking the heavy silence. "Sir," he said urgently, "this is a serious case of criminal poisoning. I am legally obligated to recommend that you contact the police immediately. We need to hand this report directly to law enforcement." I looked down at the chemical charts, and a cold, dark abyss opened within my soul. If I called the local police now, Derek and Rachel would simply be arrested quietly in their beautiful home. They would hire expensive defense attorneys by the end of the day, drag out the agonizing proceedings through endless, exhausting legal appeals, and stay safely protected in a warm, guarded cell. They would eat 3 meals a day and sleep soundly. That wasn't good enough. Arrest was too clean, too merciful for the monsters who tortured and murdered my wife. I looked up at the visibly shaken chemist, my eyes completely devoid of any lingering human warmth, fatherly love, or basic mercy. "No," I whispered to the man, folding the thick toxicology report and sliding it securely into my inside jacket pocket. "There is no need for police here today. I don't want my son just quietly put in prison. I am going to systematically erase his entire world and destroy both of them, once and for all." I walked out of the private lab and into the fading afternoon sun, carrying that toxicology report like a loaded weapon. My grief had burned out completely, leaving only a cold, structural resolve. I drove to a secure public payphone outside a rundown strip mall on the outskirts of the city, ensuring my communications left absolutely no digital footprint. I dialed a private, top-secret number I had memorized 30 years ago. The phone rang only twice before a gruff, deeply familiar voice answered the secure line with heavy suspicion. Gregory Barnes wasn't just my estate lawyer. He was a ruthless, brilliant legal shark who had built a fearsome reputation by utterly destroying anyone who tried to cheat his wealthy clients. I told him I needed an immediate, completely secret meeting, strictly off the books, far away from his downtown corporate offices. I told him my own son was actively trying to murder me. Gregory didn't ask a single redundant, clarifying question. He just gave me a specific address for a private, highly secure warehouse in an industrial area across the river, and told me to drive there now. I arrived at the massive, corrugated metal building, just as a late autumn storm began to pour. Gregory was waiting inside the giant, empty warehouse in an office built of reinforced glass and steel, bathed in harsh light. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his sharp, predatory eyes taking in my disheveled appearance as I walked through the door. I didn't waste time with small talk or emotional outbursts. I sat at the cold steel table and placed the expedited toxicology report directly in front of him. Next to the report, I placed several high-resolution photos I had taken earlier. These were images of the forged power of attorney documents Derek had tried to force on me at that sleazy strip mall law office. Gregory put on his reading glasses and opened the lab documents. I watched his jaw tighten as he read the complex chemical breakdown, his eyes scanning the terrifying passages detailing the powerful sedatives and the lethal concentration of thallium. I watched him meticulously examine the photos of the forged trust amendments, paying special attention to the fraudulent contingency clause designed to legally bypass the charitable donations and grant Derek unrestricted access to the massive estate. Gregory closed the file with a crisp, echoing sound. His face was a mask of cold, professional rage. He had handled Martha's legal affairs for 30 years. He viewed us as close personal friends. The sudden fact that my son had systematically poisoned her for financial gain ignited a terrible, silent fury within this seasoned lawyer. "We absolutely cannot take this to the police," Gregory said, his voice stripped of any basic human emotion. "If we hand this physical evidence to the authorities now, your son will immediately assemble a massive, aggressive defense team. They will loudly claim you suffer from severe dementia, just as they have been documenting for the past 5 months. They will argue the lab results are completely circumstantial, or that you somehow accidentally poison yourself due to rapidly declining cognitive abilities." Derek could easily drag this through the criminal court system for a decade while sitting comfortably at home on bail. I nodded slowly, in complete agreement with his cold, accurate assessment. I told Gregory I wanted to completely, meticulously dismantle Derek, stripping him of his fake prestige, his stolen wealth and his freedom, leaving him with absolutely nothing forever. Gregory pulled a secure, encrypted laptop from his leather briefcase and began typing with frantic, mechanical precision. He told me he was bringing his elite team of forensic accountants online immediately. If Derek was taking such astronomical, desperate risks to illegally access $40 million within a strict 2-week deadline, there had to be a massive, bleeding vulnerability in his personal finances that was screaming to be found. For the next 4 excruciating hours, I sat in that sterile warehouse office, listening to the relentless clicking of Gregory's keyboard and his hushed, intense calls with brilliant financial investigators. Tonight, Gregory's team had unrestricted backdoor access to global banking networks, hidden offshore registries, and highly encrypted financial databases. They were digital hunters, ruthlessly tracking the invisible, intricate flow of capital across international borders. I watched the cold rain lash against the high warehouse windows, my mind completely focused on the total destruction facing the man I once proudly called my son. Derek had always projected an image of a flawless, high-performing, invincible investment banker. He wore custom-tailored, expensive suits, drove sleek luxury imports, and never hesitated to brag about his vast, invincible stock portfolio. But as the time slowly ticked past midnight, Gregory finally pushed his glowing laptop away from the center of the desk. He took off his reading glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and let out a deep, impossibly heavy sigh. The profound truth he's uncovered is not just shocking, it is utterly pathetic. Your son is an utter, bottom-feeding fraud, Thomas, Gregory said calmly, turning the laptop screen so I could clearly see the cascading columns of red numbers. That image of the wildly successful investment banker is nothing more than a hollow, desperately constructed facade intended to completely deceive everyone around him. He does not have a vast, thriving stock portfolio. He doesn't even legally own that massive luxury estate where he and Rachel currently live. The mortgage on that big house is leveraged to the absolute limit, and he has secretly taken out 4 separate, highly illegal second loans on that massive property using completely forged corporate P&L statements. I stared silently at the catastrophic financial ruin displayed prominently on the glowing screen. Gregory carefully clicked on a specific folder in the digital dashboard, opening a series of highly complex, heavily encrypted transaction logs detailing massive financial abuse that had been happening for 3 years. Derek is a severe, utterly degenerate gambler, Gregory continued, his stern tone dripping with absolute, undisguised disgust. Over the past 3 long years, he has completely emptied every legitimate savings account, recklessly funding massive, highly volatile cryptocurrency speculations and illegal offshore sports betting syndicates. When the global crypto market suddenly crashed and his incredibly aggressive bets failed miserably, he began aggressively borrowing high-margin loans, desperately trying to hide his massive, rapidly accumulating losses. According to an exhaustive forensic audit, Derek is currently drowning in exactly $15 million of unsecured, completely illegal offshore gambling debt. I silently absorbed the staggering number, 15 million. Gregory leaned over the steel table, his professional expression turning impossibly dark and cold. It is much worse than that, Thomas, the senior lawyer warned, pulling up a top-secret file. His expert team had just successfully intercepted this file from a secure dark web communications server. The massive funds Derek illegally borrowed came directly from a highly violent, extremely ruthless underground criminal syndicate. Intercepted messages confirm they are actively threatening to brutally murder Derek. He is murdering his parents to steal $40 million today entirely to save his own pathetic life. The revelation hung in the cold, sterile air of the industrial warehouse like a physical weight. $15 million in debt, owed to people who didn't send polite dunning notices or negotiate repayment plans. My son wasn't just a greedy, entitled speculator seeking an early inheritance. He was a desperate beast backed into a corner, actively drowning in a violent criminal underworld, willing to systematically slaughter his own parents in exchange for survival. I looked across the steel table at Gregory. The senior lawyer's face looked like it had been carved from absolute granite. He slowly closed the top-secret financial files on the encrypted laptop, crossed his fingers, and waited for my instructions in absolute silence. I told him we wouldn't wait for Derek to attempt another clumsy legal stunt or draft another forged document. We were going to give our son exactly what he was desperately trying to steal, but we were going to line it with invisible federal razor wire. Gregory's lips curled into a sharp, terrifying smile, and he immediately reopened his laptop, his fingers dancing across the keys. For the next 3 agonizing hours, we meticulously constructed a perfect, devastating financial trap. Gregory called it a digital honeypot. Using his high-level elite banking contacts, he cleanly carved a full $5 million from my main estate holdings and moved it into a newly created, highly restricted subsidiary account. This specific account was rigged with complex digital tripwires. Then we drafted a very narrow, extremely specific localized power of attorney. This was completely different from the all-encompassing, blank check document Derek had tried to force on me at that rundown strip mall law office. This new document granted my son temporary legal authorization to manage, trade, and execute transactions within that single $5 million account only. I asked Gregory how this specific strategy would destroy him. Gregory explained the mechanics with cold, clinical precision. By granting Derek access to this specific account, and under the strict guise of legitimate domestic investment management, we were actively inviting him to cross a massive, impassable legal red line. The moment Derek attempted to wire those funds to an unverified offshore entity to pay off his illegal gambling debts, he would commit a textbook, irrefutable act of federal wire fraud. Furthermore, because that account was digitally tagged by Gregory's forensics team, the lawyer was secretly contacting his highest-level contacts at the FBI. The cyber division would actively monitor the routing, address the exact second an international wire transfer was initiated. This was a trap with a mandatory, lengthy federal prison sentence, completely bypassing any local police jurisdiction or expensive bail hearings. Just as the bleak morning light began to break, staining the city skyline in bruised shades of purple and charcoal gray, I left the industrial warehouse. I drove back to my spacious, quiet house, mentally and physically prepared for the absolute grand finale of my life. As I walked through the heavy front door, Rachel was already awake in the kitchen, cheerfully boiling another pot of fresh, lethally aromatic chamomile tea. I immediately let my shoulders slump forward, dragging my heavy feet across the polished hardwood floor with a deliberately rattling, wheezing breath that echoed in the quiet foyer. She rushed over, her face a flawless, practiced mask of sickening concern, gently scolding me for running out so early when I was in such a frail state. I told her I had just gone to the local pharmacy to pick up the new vitamin supplements she requested, playing the part of a confused, highly obedient victim to absolute perfection. I gratefully took the steaming mug she handed me, walked slowly into my private study, and poured the toxic liquid directly into the trash can, masking the sound of the splash with a loud, violent coughing fit. Later that afternoon, I called Derek. I told him my chest felt extremely tight. My mind was failing faster than ever, and I needed him to come over immediately. I told him I needed to get things between us sorted out. He arrived in less than 20 minutes, the tires of that expensive luxury SUV screeching as he recklessly sped into the long driveway. He practically ran into the house, his eyes scanning the hallway with almost undisguised, frenzied desperation. He needed those funds immediately. The final deadline of the underground gang was likely close at hand, breathing violently down his neck. I sat in the large leather armchair in the center of the study, wrapped tightly in a thick wool blanket, deliberately trembling. I weakly motioned for him to sit in the chair across from the mahogany desk. "Derek," I whispered, letting my voice crack with a forged, miserable sorrow, "I'm so tired. I really can't handle these complex administrative battles anymore. You were absolutely right yesterday. I am rapidly losing my grip on things, and I'm terrified of ruining the financial legacy I built with your mother." Derek leaned forward aggressively, his hands gripping his knees tightly, struggling to mask his predatory hunger with a sickening depth of empathy. "It's okay, Dad," he whispered smoothly, his voice dripping with fake comfort. "I'm here. From now on, I'll handle all the heavy lifting. You just need to sign those documents we looked at yesterday, and you can finally get some real rest." I shook my head slowly, letting a practiced tear slide down my weathered cheek. I told him my fragile heart simply couldn't handle the immense pressure of signing away the entire $40 million estate in one go. I told him it felt too much like giving up on my life entirely. Instead, I pulled the manila folder Gregory had newly drafted from under the wool blanket and slowly slid it across the desk. I told him I had spoken with a junior clerk at the bank earlier that morning. I explained that I had separated $5 million into a distinct, exclusive trading account. I wanted him to take over that specific account first, helping me manage some aggressive investments, just to calm my anxious mind. I assured him that if he did well on this initial portfolio, we could easily discuss transferring the remainder of the family trust next month. Derek stared down at the crisp white documents on the desk. $5 million. I could almost see the calculations running frantically, desperately behind his black eyes. It wasn't the full $40 million he desperately needed to steal, but a massive, immediate injection of this liquid capital was more than enough for him. It was enough to buy the crucial time he needed to temporarily appease the violent people hunting him, ensuring his immediate survival while he figured out how to quietly take care of me and take the rest of the inheritance. Greed and pure, undisguised desperation engaged in a visible, violent battle on his face. He picked up the legal documents, his eyes scanning rapidly across the narrow, specific terms. Gregory had drafted it perfectly. To a man desperately drowning, this looked exactly like a legal, incredibly lucky windfall from a demented father. Derek reached into the pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out his heavy silver fountain pen. He didn't hesitate for even another second. He aggressively signed his name on the dotted line in a quick, elegant flourish, legally binding his own wrist into a federal honeypot. I let out a heavy, weary sigh, leaned my head back against the leather chair, and told him the account was fully activated, with the digital routing access codes clearly printed on the second page. I asked him, as if casually, if he could handle one quick transaction today, just to get things started and set my mind at ease. Derek gave me a sharp, triumphant smile, completely unaware that he was smiling gleefully at his own absolute destruction. He pulled out his sleek laptop right there on my desk, his fingers flying frantically across the keyboard. He logged into the banking portal rapidly, and in less than 3 minutes, he initiated a massive, untraceable offshore wire transfer, moving exactly $5 million. He pressed the execute key. The quiet digital notification tone of a completed transaction echoed softly in the silent study. Derek closed his laptop and let out a long, trembling breath of pure, overwhelming relief. He stood up somewhat clumsily, patted me on the shoulder, told me to get some quiet rest, and assured me that everything would be absolutely perfect now. He walked confidently out of the room, leaving me alone in the shadows. The second the heavy wooden door clicked shut, my secure phone vibrated violently against my chest. I pulled it out. It was a highly encrypted message from Gregory. The wire transfer was successfully intercepted. The federal tripwire had been triggered instantly. The FBI's cyber division had successfully recorded his exact IP address and captured the illegal offshore routing numbers linked to the violent underground criminal syndicate directly. Derek had just served his own damning evidence to federal investigators on a silver platter. He was officially trapped in an ironclad, inescapable cage constructed by his own hands. I stared at the glowing screen, a cold, dark satisfaction taking deep root in my bones. My son would lose his freedom, his flawless reputation, and his entire future. But just as I began to slide the device back into my pocket, another emergency alert began flashing rapidly on the encrypted screen. It wasn't a message from my lawyer. It was another secure, highly encrypted text from Leo, the young, terrified audio technician I had left in the back room of the crowded repair shop. I opened the message. The text was brutally brief, yet it made the blood in my veins turn to absolute ice. "Get to the shop immediately," Leo wrote, his sheer terror seeping through the cold digital text. "I finally decrypted the hidden, remaining segments of the audio file from your wife's smart glasses. It is infinitely worse than we ever imagined." Leo's message burned in my mind. I didn't waste a second celebrating the trap I'd set for my son. I grabbed my keys, slipped out the side door into the afternoon rain, and dove into my sedan. The drive across town blurred into a fever dream of red lights and slick asphalt. I gripped the steering wheel with such terrifying force that my knuckles turned bone white. I navigated the familiar streets toward the commercial district, my stomach knotted into a tight, sick ball. What could possibly be worse than knowing my own flesh and blood had poisoned the love of my life? I skidded into the cracked parking lot of the electronics repair shop, tires throwing up a massive spray of water. The glowing neon "open" sign in the front window was off. I bolted into the torrential downpour and yanked open the heavy glass door. Leo was standing nervously behind the cluttered service counter, pale and looking physically nauseous. The second I stepped inside, the young technician rushed forward, dropped the heavy deadbolt, and pulled the metal security shutters down. The narrow shop plunged into suffocating shadows, lit only by the harsh blue glow of the computer monitor on his main workbench. "You need to sit down for this, Mr. Caldwell," Leo whispered, his voice trembling in the quiet space. He pulled over an office chair and gently guided me into it. I spent 12 hours running complex decryption algorithms on the damaged memory blocks from your wife's smart glasses. I thought it was just a corrupted audio file, a glitch in the background software. But the impact of her fall didn't just break the microphone. It triggered a hidden video cache built into the device's firmware. The glasses were recording visual data directly to a partition just before the processor shattered on the floor. I reconstructed the last 3 minutes of audio and video data. I sat frozen in the chair, my breath caught in my throat. Martha had bought those glasses to help her see fine print and record cooking videos hands-free. I never in a million years imagined they would become the silent witness to her own murder. "Play it," I commanded, my voice stripped of the frail old man's facade I had been wearing hours ago. Leo hesitated, his hand hovering over the computer mouse. He looked at me with deep pity before clicking. The wide monitor flickered to life. The digital image was warped at first, filled with jagged static, before suddenly becoming breathtakingly, chillingly clear. I was looking out through my beautiful wife's own eyes. The visual perspective shifted naturally as she moved gracefully around our bright kitchen. I could hear her soft, familiar humming. It was the gentle melody she'd sung for decades, and the beautiful, comforting sound shattered my aching heart into 1,000 pieces. She was standing by the marble island, calmly pouring a glass of water. Suddenly, the camera perspective jerked violently. A sharp, painful gasp ripped through the restored audio. Martha dropped the heavy glass. I watched it shatter into 1,000 shimmering shards on the polished hardwood floor. Her breathing became shallow, quick, and incredibly labored. As she slumped heavily onto the cold kitchen tiles, the angle of the camera tilted downward violently. Her hands came directly into view, clawing desperately at her chest. She was suffering the exact chemical-induced massive heart attack the chemist had warned me about. The cumulative thallium poison had finally triggered a catastrophic cardiovascular failure. The image shook violently as Martha desperately tried to drag her body across the cold floor, reaching weakly toward the lower kitchen cabinets. Her voice was incredibly faint, filled with absolute terror, echoing loudly through the small repair shop speakers. "Derek," she wheezed, slurring her words in agony. "Rachel, please help me." A pair of stylish designer heels stepped casually into the video frame. The camera tilted slowly upward. Rachel was standing directly over my dying wife. She was wearing a pristine white blouse, casually holding a cup of freshly brewed hot coffee in her hand. There was absolutely no panic, sorrow, or human concern in her flawless expression. It was a cold, chilling mask of indifference. "Rachel," Martha gasped, her hand reaching upward, trembling violently in the digital frame. "The meds," on the counter, Please, my heart, I can't breathe at all." Rachel slowly crouched down, setting her ceramic coffee mug neatly on the granite countertop. She reached out gracefully and picked up the bright orange prescription bottle containing Martha's nitroglycerin. The camera perfectly captured the clear plastic bottle being held firmly in Rachel's manicured hand. My poor wife let out a soft, desperate whimper of relief, foolishly thinking salvation was finally within reach. Instead, Rachel maintained a dead, hollow eye contact with Martha, unscrewed the child-proof plastic cap with a fluid, practiced motion, and calmly walked straight to the stainless steel kitchen sink. The restored audio clearly captured the sharp, jarring rattle of dozens of life-saving pills falling into the metal drain, followed immediately by the loud sound of tap water washing them away forever. Martha let out a suffocating, broken sob. As her remaining strength evaporated entirely, the angle of the camera went flat against the floor. She was completely helpless, watching her daughter-in-law systematically strip away the medicine that could have saved her life. Then another set of heavy footsteps confidently entered the quiet kitchen, breaking the dead silence. Derek slowly moved into the absolute center of the digital frame. He was wearing expensive sneakers, looking down at his struggling mother with a detached, clinical, cold curiosity, like a man observing an insect struggling on hot pavement. He crouched directly beside Rachel, leaning in incredibly close. His face filled the entire digital screen. He stared straight into the hidden camera lens embedded in the heavy frames of the smart glasses, completely unaware he was being recorded in high definition. The pure, undisguised evil radiating from his dark, greedy eyes made my aching stomach physically turn. He reached out and gently stroked Martha's hair, a grotesque, sickening mockery, imitating the comfort a loving son would give in his mother's final moments. I slumped completely in the chair in the small repair shop, my fingernails digging viciously into the armrests of the office chair, forced to witness the exact horrific moment my family was permanently destroyed. Derek's face leaned to within inches of the hidden microphone. His voice was a soft, lethal whisper that seemed to echo infinitely in the small, perfectly silent room. "Sorry, Mom," Derek murmured softly, his tone chillingly level, incredibly steady, entirely devoid of any human soul or basic mercy. "I need the trust money. Dad won't suspect a thing." "He's too trusting." The video image stayed steadily on his cold, hollow, and utterly terrifying smile for that final, agonizing second. Then, I clearly heard the horrific, wet, rattling sound of my wife's final, desperate breath. The camera twitched slightly as her broken body went completely limp on the cold kitchen tiles, and the digital screen instantly cut to dead, pitch black. I sat in the dim, oppressive silence of the crowded electronics shop. The harsh blue light from the idle computer monitor cast long, hollow shadows across the scratched wooden workbench. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse in uncontrollable agony. The deep, suffocating grief that had heavily anchored my soul for the past 5 excruciating months just vanished into thin air. Within seconds, that crushing, raw sorrow was completely incinerated, burned away by a sudden, terrifying, purely weaponized wave of fury. My brain, usually a quiet warehouse for complex structural math and load-bearing calculations, instantly shifted into a state of absolute, icy clarity. Derek hadn't just watched his mother die. He had actively orchestrated her murder, coldly throwing away her life-saving medicine while staring straight into her eyes, all to accelerate his access to the financial trust he desperately needed to cover up his pathetic illegal debts. Beside me, the young technician was shaking violently. Leo stared at the black screen, all the color drained from his face, his chest heaving with short, terrified breaths. He reached out with a trembling hand, fingers searching desperately across the cluttered desk to grab his phone. "Mr. Caldwell," Leo stammered, his voice breaking with extreme panic. We have to call the police right now. We have to show them this video. They'll arrest him for murder tonight." I reached out with an incredibly steady hand and clamped a firm grip around his shaking wrist. I gently pushed his hand away from the phone, maintaining a calm but irresistible authoritative grip. "No, Leo," I said levelly, my voice stripped of any trace of the frail, confused old man I'd been playing hours ago. "We absolutely cannot call the local police. If we call the police now, they will just let Derek be arrested quietly in the comfort of his own home. He will immediately hire an expensive, highly aggressive team of defense lawyers. They will drag this video through endless court procedural hearings. They will claim this recording was digitally tampered with, or they will push for a long trial during which he can stay comfortably out on bail, squandering the money he stole from my accounts. A quiet arrest is far too merciful for what he did to Martha." Leo swallowed hard, his wide eyes shifting from the black screen back to my face. "What do you want to do then?" he whispered nervously. I stood up from the office chair, feeling a sudden, powerful surge of adrenaline pumping rapidly through my veins. The lethal thallium toxin and powerful sedatives coursing through me were instantly suppressed by a purely primal instinct to annihilate the predator. "Tomorrow night is Derek's 35th birthday," I explained coldly, pacing slowly across the narrow floor of the repair shop. "He is hosting an incredibly lavish, highly exclusive gala for himself in the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton in the city center. He has invited over 300 guests. His entire network of wealthy investment banking colleagues will be there. The violent underground syndicate contacts he owes $15 million to will also be attending, disguised as legitimate corporate investors. And the most sickening irony of it all is that he used my personal credit card to pay for this massive, opulent celebration, bragging proudly to his friends about his incredible financial success." I stopped pacing and looked the young technician straight in the eye. "I am not going to let him hide behind closed doors," I declared firmly. "I am going to destroy him in front of every single person he is desperate to impress. I am going to strip him of his money, his freedom, and his flawless public reputation at the exact same moment. I am going to leave him completely humiliated, ruined, and trapped with nowhere left to run." Leo nodded slowly, wiping a drop of cold sweat from his forehead. He turned back to his complex computer equipment. "Tell me exactly what you need me to do," he said, his voice finally steadying. "Export that fully restored, decrypted video file immediately," I instructed, pointing a firm finger at the glowing monitor. "Put the highest resolution version of the recording onto a master USB flash drive. I want the audio to be as crisp as crystal. I want every syllable of his confession to be clearly audible. Make 2 secure backup copies and hide them in your shop safe. I am taking the master drive tonight." As Leo quickly began executing complex digital commands, running the video footage through a rendering program to ensure the file was perfectly stable, I pulled my encrypted phone from my jacket pocket. I went to my secure contacts list and dialed Gregory Barnes. The senior lawyer answered this private line immediately, his tone sharp and alert. "Thomas," Gregory said crisply, "the cyber division just confirmed that the initial wire transfer has reached that restricted honeypot account. Derek took the bait completely. The digital trap has successfully locked." "That is excellent news, Gregory," I replied levelly, my voice echoing with the cold, mechanical precision of a steel trap slamming shut. "But the situation has escalated fundamentally. I am currently at an electronics shop. I have just watched the video file recovered from Martha's smart glasses. Derek and Rachel murdered her, Gregory. They deliberately withheld her heart medicine and watched her die on the kitchen floor while mocking my trust." A heavy, lethal silence fell over the encrypted phone line. When Gregory finally spoke, his voice was a low, terrifying growl. I will personally watch him rot in a federal cage for the rest of his pathetic life, the lawyer vowed. Give the order, Thomas. How do you want to execute the final blow? I need you to contact your lead agent at the FBI immediately, I commanded coolly. Tell the cyber division we are accelerating the timeline. I don't want them raiding my house tonight. Derek is hosting a massive birthday gala tomorrow night at 8:00 p.m. at the Ritz-Carlton. His underground syndicate handlers will be in attendance. I want federal agents standing by on the flanks. I want them to seal off every single exit to that ballroom. No problem, Gregory confirmed instantly. I will have a federal tactical squad deployed in the hotel's service corridors. They will remain completely invisible until you give the absolute final signal. What are you planning to do with the video file? I watched as Leo carefully ejected the small black USB drive from the computer tower. He handed the tiny digital weapon directly to me. I slid it securely into the inside pocket of my jacket, keeping my hand flat against the fabric. I am going to give my son a birthday gift he will never forget, I told the seasoned lawyer. Tomorrow night, when he stands up to make a toast, I am going to hijack the big screen. He is going to lose everything on a silver platter. Drop the hammer tonight. The following evening, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the master bedroom, meticulously straightening the silk lapels of my tailored charcoal tuxedo. For the past 5 months, I had been actively practicing the humiliating posture of a dying, broken man. I had slumped my shoulders, dragged my feet, and forced my voice to carry a manufactured, wheezing fragility. Tonight, this pathetic performance was officially terminated. I stood upright, my spine perfectly rigid, shoulders back, chin set like impenetrable structural steel. I slid the master USB flash drive into the inside pocket of my chest, resting it directly against my heart. The cold, hard edge of the plastic casing was a constant and comforting reminder of the absolute destruction I was about to unleash. I drove myself to the Ritz-Carlton. The rain from last night had stopped, and the city streets were slick, reflecting the flickering neon lights of the financial district. I handed my car keys to the valet with a firm, steady motion and walked into the massive revolving glass doors of the luxury hotel. The grand ballroom was a masterclass in grotesque, stolen opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden light over hundreds of guests, dressed in high-end designer gowns and tailored suits. A string quartet played softly in the corner, but it was entirely drowned out by the loud, arrogant chatter of investment bankers, corporate executives, and the dangerous, quiet men lurking on the periphery, representing the violent underground syndicate. Derek hadn't skimped on a single cent, effortlessly squandering my hard-earned money to project an image of an untouchable financial overlord. I stepped onto the thick carpet of the ballroom, scanning the crowded room with the focus of an absolute predator. It didn't take long for me to find them. Derek was standing by a towering ice sculpture, holding a glass of expensive champagne, laughing loudly at a joke told by a man with dead eyes in a tailored silk suit. Rachel was draped elegantly on Derek's arm, wearing a diamond necklace that likely cost more than my first house. My presence caused a ripple of attention as I walked steadily through the sea of guests, like the sudden drop in air pressure before a storm. I didn't drag my feet. I didn't cough. I walked with a heavy, undeniable stride of authority, the stride of a man who possessed absolute control over his domain. Rachel saw me first. The flawless practiced smile froze completely on her face. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped Derek's bicep viciously. She whispered something urgently in his ear. Derek turned. His arrogant laughter died instantly in his throat. He stared at me, his eyes wide with pure, undisguised confusion. He had been expecting to see the frail, confused old man who was practically begging for help in the study yesterday afternoon. He had been expecting to see a victim deeply sedated by a double dose of poison tea, perhaps entirely unable to attend this gala. Instead, he was looking at a formidable, commanding patriarch, radiating a cold, incredibly terrifying vitality. In a split second, raw panic flashed across his face. He excused himself quickly from the dangerous gangsters and practically sprinted across the ballroom floor to intercept me before I could speak to any of the wealthy guests. "Dad!" Derek gasped, his voice tight and breathless as he blocked my path. "Why are you walking around like this? You look so different today. Are you sure you should even be out of bed?" I looked straight into his eyes, keeping my gaze completely flat, entirely stripped of any remaining trace of fatherly warmth. "I feel wonderful tonight, Derek," I said levelly, my voice projecting a deep, resonant strength that made him visibly recoil. "It is absolutely amazing what a miracle a man's body can perform after just one day of proper rest and a clear mind. I wouldn't have missed your 35th birthday celebration for anything in the world." Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously above his silk bow tie. He tried desperately to read my expression, searching frantically for any sign that I knew the truth, but my face was an impenetrable stone fortress. He managed a stiff, awkward smile, deciding to play along, desperately needing to ensure his financial survival right in front of him. "Well, I'm incredibly glad you feel stronger," he muttered, leaning in closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. He looked back over his shoulder to ensure none of his high society guests or syndicate handlers were in earshot. He gripped my elbow, trying to gently guide me toward a quiet alcove near the draped velvet curtains, but I planted my feet firmly, completely refusing to be moved. "Listen, Dad. I want to tell you some good news," Derek whispered urgently, his eyes flickering with a sickening mix of greedy desperation and deep relief. "That exclusive trading account you set up for me yesterday, the $5 million, I successfully executed the initial trade this morning. I moved the funds into a highly secure offshore portfolio. It's going to generate huge, immediate returns for the family trust. You never have to worry about any financial burdens ever again. I have handled absolutely everything." Hearing the breathtaking, stunning audacity behind his lie made my stomach physically turn. He was standing right in front of me, proudly bragging about committing a federal wire fraud, completely convinced he had succeeded in stealing my life savings to pay off the violent people who were actively hunting him down. He thought he was smarter than me. He thought he had secured his future, completely unaware that the FBI had instantly recorded his illegal transfer, completely documented his digital fingerprints, and obtained the necessary criminal arrest warrant. I let out a slow, even breath. I looked at the man who shared my last name. There was absolutely nothing left worth saving here. The biological connection between us had been completely severed, sliced clean by his undisguised, sociopathic greed. I reached out and placed a firm, heavy hand directly onto his shoulder. I gripped his expensive suit jacket, my fingers suddenly applying enough violent pressure to make him wince slightly in unexpected pain. "You have reaped what you have sown, son," I said softly. Although the voice was quiet, the words carried the devastating, undeniable weight of a heavy iron hammer striking a block of wood. Derek blinked, his brow furrowed deeply in confusion. "What is that supposed to mean, Dad?" I didn't offer him a single syllable of explanation. I smoothly released my grip on his shoulder, turned completely away from him, and walked straight off. I left him standing all alone by the velvet curtains. I walked with purpose through the crowded room, sliding past crystal chandeliers, opulent buffet tables, and those dangerous, fully armed mob enforcers lurking in the shadows. My destination was the main audiovisual control room, which was heavily hidden behind a row of tall floral arrangements. I walked behind the thick black curtains and pushed open the soundproof door. Leo was sitting there quietly, bathed in the harsh blue light of the master control laptop. He was wearing a simple black catering uniform, perfectly camouflaged as an invisible backstage tech assistant. I silently handed the digital flash drive loaded with data to him. Leo took the rectangle from my hand and inserted it directly into the master input port of his central broadcast console. A glowing green light flickered softly, confirming that the lethal payload was primed and locked into the hotel's audio-visual network. I nodded my thanks to the young technician, then turned and slipped quietly out through the velvet curtains. The shocking cacophony of the grand ballroom instantly rushed back over me, a chaotic symphony of clinking crystal, loud jazz, and the hollow laughter of the corrupt. I walked with steady steps across the crowded floor, ignoring the curious stares of corporate partners who recognized me but weren't sure how to approach a patriarch they assumed was fading away. I walked straight to the main VIP table located at the very front of the massive stage. The table was draped in white silk and adorned with towering floral arrangements of orchids. I sat in the seat assigned to me, sitting perfectly straight in my gilded chair, and smoothed the lapels of my tuxedo with deliberate, icy composure. To my left sat a row of influential bank executives who managed billions and controlled the local financial sector. To my right sat a group of terrifyingly quiet men in dark suits who didn't laugh, didn't socialize, and drank expensive spirits with cold, calculating eyes. These men were undoubtedly high-level representatives of the underground crime syndicate, the very same ruthless collectors Derek had desperately tried to pay off with my isolated honeypot account just hours earlier. They sat comfortably in public, fully believing their $15 million extortion had been successfully completed. I watched their grim faces, feeling a satisfying rush as I knew that FBI tactical teams were already quietly deployed in the service corridors behind the kitchen, patiently waiting for the command I was about to give. Suddenly, the string quartet ceased abruptly. The lighting from the crystal chandeliers dimmed significantly, casting a dramatic spotlight onto the center of the polished wooden stage. A quiet, expectant silence rippled rapidly across the vast ballroom as 300 wealthy guests eagerly turned their attention forward. Derek stepped confidently into the bright circle of light, holding a glass of shimmering champagne high in his right hand. He looked radiant, the very picture of young, undeniable success. His tailored suit fit perfectly, and as he caught the stage lights, he flashed a charming smile to the audience below. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Derek began, his voice amplified by the sound system, echoing with manufactured sincerity. He paused, letting a ripple of polite applause sweep the room before lowering his head humbly. "To see so many incredible friends and essential partners gathered here to celebrate my 35th birthday is the greatest honor of my life. Over the past year, we have achieved massive, unprecedented milestones together. We have navigated incredibly turbulent waters, conquered volatile markets, and built incredibly lucrative investment portfolios to secure our future. But tonight isn't just about celebrating corporate victories or aggressive market expansion." Derek slowly, dramatically, stepped forward, his voice dropping into a softer, incredibly sympathetic register. He masterfully manipulated the rhythm of his speech, playing the crowd with the sickening skill of a seasoned predator. "Tonight is about celebrating the core foundation that made all of this possible. It is about honoring deep, unshakable family values. It is about acknowledging the profound sacrifices made by those who tirelessly built the sturdy platform upon which we currently stand." He turned his gaze directly toward my VIP table, placing his free hand flat against his chest, right over his heart, a heart of betrayal. "As many of you know, this has been an incredibly difficult, painful year for my family," Derek continued, his voice perfectly choked with fake emotion. "5 months ago, We lost my beloved mother, Martha. She was the absolute guiding light in our lives. Her warm, compassionate soul taught me the truly immortal values of kindness, patience, and unconditional love. Her unfortunate passing left an unfillable, bottomless void in our home. I think of her beautiful smile every morning. I think of her gentle wisdom every evening. Everything I do, every deal I close, is strictly to honor her immortal memory. A collective sigh rippled through the audience, a ripple of genuine sympathy. I glanced to the side. Rachel, sitting at the adjacent table, delicately dabbed the corner of her eye with a transparent lace handkerchief, expertly wiping away a completely forged tear. My jaw clenched with immense force. The sheer audacity of their coordinated performance boiled a toxic heat in my veins. They were standing in front of hundreds of people, publicly utilizing the tragic death they had engineered themselves, wearing their manufactured grief like a designer accessory to solicit social sympathy and blind corporate trust. Of course, Derek added, his voice trembling as he gestured with open arms toward me, showcasing a masterclass in filial devotion. I must publicly pay tribute to my father, Thomas, the visionary architect of our family trust. As many of you have seen, his health has deteriorated rapidly since he lost his beloved wife. It has been incredibly difficult to watch the strongest man I have ever known face such severe, heartbreaking physical struggles. But Dad, I want you to know right now in front of all our friends, I am here to carry this heavy burden for you. I will proudly protect the incredible legacy you built. I will stand strong. So you can get some good rest. The grand ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. Wealthy guests stood from their chairs, clapping enthusiastically, deeply moved by the tragic narrative of a loyal son bravely stepping up to protect his frail father. The men from the syndicate remained in their seats, but raised their glasses in a silent, approving toast to the man who had just paid them millions. I remained motionless at the VIP table, my hands flat against the cold silk tablecloth. I didn't clap. I just stared at the monster standing on the stage, channeling every ounce of my weaponized, icy fury into a perfectly blank, chillingly calm expression. Derek smiled warmly, absorbing the unearned adoration of the massive crowd. He waited patiently for the enthusiastic applause to die down before raising his champagne glass one last time. To kick off the main course of this wonderful evening, and to give it a fitting conclusion, Derek announced brightly, his voice echoing clearly in the speakers, I have prepared a very special visual tribute. Please turn your attention to the screen behind me. Now is a curated slideshow honoring the extraordinary, loving woman who made me who I am today, my dear mother. Derek turned smoothly, pointing straight toward the massive, 20-foot projection screen suspended directly above the stage. The bright stage lights cut to black instantly, plunging the entire room into deep, dramatic darkness. The crowd went completely quiet, shifting in their seats, eagerly anticipating a moving montage of family memories. I slowly reached under the white silk tablecloth. I felt the cold plastic casing of the communication device Leo had given me. I pressed my thumb heavily onto the single launch button. I gave Leo the silent signal to drop the hammer. The darkness of the grand ballroom felt suffocating as the massive projection screen flickered to life. Derek stood proudly on the polished wooden stage with a smug, expectant smile on his face. He held his crystal champagne flute, ready to toast to a completely fabricated memory of his mother. 300 wealthy guests sat comfortably in their gilded chairs, their gazes locked onto the glowing white rectangle. They were prepared to embark on a sentimental journey, watching a montage of carefully selected childhood photos designed to solidify Derek's public image. Instead, the high-definition projector emitted a harsh, jagged digital static noise. A sharp hiss ripped through the sound system, instantly silencing the polite murmurs of the crowd. The screen shattered into chaotic blocks of data before snapping violently into sharp focus. The image that was presented was a raw, incredibly disorienting first-person perspective. It was the visual footage recovered directly from my beautiful wife's damaged smart glasses. Simply due to the massive size of the projection, the visceral, real-time footage became impossible to escape. Martha's magnified hands appeared on the massive screen, casually reaching out to pour a glass of water in our bright kitchen. Her soft, familiar humming resonated through the massive concert speakers. The gentle melody echoed eerily through the opulent space. For 5 agonizing seconds, the high society audience simply stared in absolute, dead silence. Then the horrific medical event began. The screen shook violently, the visual perspective tilting to a sickening angle. A sharp gasp ripped through the ballroom silence, amplified 100 times by the subwoofers. It was pure human agony. On the screen, the heavy glass shattered into 1,000 pieces on the kitchen floor. The impact sounded like a bomb detonating within the quiet hotel venue. The crowd collectively winced, a ripple of involuntary alarm sweeping through the room. The camera angle dropped sharply as Martha slumped heavily onto the hard tiles. Her magnified hands clawed desperately at her chest, breathing shallow and incredibly labored. The audio was clear as water, capturing every gasp, every desperate struggle for oxygen as the lethal thallium toxin ravaged her failing cardiovascular system. A woman near the front row let out a stifled gasp, covering her mouth with manicured hands. Investment bankers and the dangerous syndicate men sat frozen in paralyzing horror. "Derek," my wife gasped through the speakers, her voice filled with naked terror. "Rachel, please help me." The massive screen captured a pair of stylish designer heels, stepping casually into the frame. The camera tilted slowly upward to reveal Rachel standing directly over her dying mother-in-law. She was holding a ceramic coffee mug, her face a mask of unyielding, cold, and incredibly terrifying indifference. "Rachel," Martha gasped, her trembling hands reaching upward in a desperate plea for survival. "The meds on the counter, please." "It's my heart, I can't breathe at all." The entire ballroom held its breath. 300 people watched in dead silence as the massive image of Rachel crouched down calmly. They watched her pick up the bright orange prescription bottle. They watched her unscrew the childproof cap with fluid, chilling precision. A collective shiver of revulsion erupted through the guests as Rachel walked straight to the kitchen sink. The sound system roared with the horrific, rattling sound of dozens of life-saving pills falling into the metal drain. This was followed immediately by the rush of cold tap water, washing away her only chance of survival forever. A low, sick murmur began to gather rapidly at the back of the room. Pure, visceral disgust radiated from the guests in attendance, but this digital execution wasn't finished. Another set of heavy footsteps confidently entered the kitchen audio frame. Derek slowly moved into the absolute center of the 20-foot screen. He crouched beside Rachel, leaning in incredibly close to his dying mother. His face was magnified to monstrous proportions, filling the entire stage background. The crowd gazed directly into the eyes of the man, who had just hosted them as their host. The pure evil radiating from his digital gaze made the opulent ballroom feel colder than a morgue. He stroked Martha's hair gently, a grotesque, tender mockery that made several guests turn away in sickness. He leaned to within inches of the hidden microphone, embedded in his mother's glasses. "Sorry, Mom," Derek whispered. The digital audio was flawless. The smooth, lethal words boomed throughout the room, reverberating violently against the walls. "I need the trust money. Dad won't suspect a thing. He's too trusting." The entire grand ballroom seemed to collectively fall into a dark, bottomless abyss. The massive screen stayed steadily on his cold, hollow, and utterly terrifying smile for that final, agonizing second. Then the speakers broadcast the horrific, wet rattling sound of my wife's final, desperate breath. As her broken body went completely limp on the cold tiles, the camera twitched slightly, and the massive screen instantly cut to dead, pitch-black silence. The deafening silence suffocated the room for 3 full seconds. The absolute scale of the betrayal paralyzed everyone present. Then the crystal chandeliers flared violently back to life, instantly flooding the ballroom with bright, unforgiving light. The harsh illumination shattered the terrifying spell. A fragile crystal champagne flute finally slipped from Derek's paralyzed fingers. It smashed against the polished wooden stage, shattering into hundreds of shimmering pieces. The sharp breaking sound rang out like a gunshot. The sound broke the dam. Rachel erupted into a piercing, hysterical scream of pure, unadulterated panic, stumbling backward off the stage, clutching her head in absolute terror. The elite crowd exploded into a massive, chaotic riot. Wealthy executives shouted in extreme outrage, and the sickened murmurs quickly turned into loud, aggressive accusations. The quiet, dangerous men from the syndicate stood up slowly from their tables, their cold eyes locked onto Derek with lethal intent. They realized instantly that the man who owed them $15 million wasn't some wealthy investment genius, but a pathetic, exposed murderer about to be swallowed by the federal judicial system. Derek stood frozen in the absolute center of the stage, his perfect, tailored world evaporating into dust around him. The color drained from his face, leaving him a terrifying, sickening shade of gray. His jaw opened and closed silently, desperately trying to construct a passable lie, but there was nowhere left to hide. The digital evidence was irrefutable, damning, and completely public. Slowly, painfully, his terrified eyes swept across the chaotic sea of incredibly angry faces, desperately searching for an anchor in the storm. His gaze finally swept past the front row and snapped onto me. I sat extremely quietly at the main VIP table. I didn't scream. I didn't flinch. I didn't break eye contact. I maintained a posture of absolute structural rigidity, my face a cold mask of pure, weaponized fury. As Derek looked into my eyes and felt the fury radiating from my calm demeanor, the catastrophic truth finally smashed through his panicked brain. He saw that the frail, confused old man I had played while systematically manipulating him for the past 5 months was completely gone. He saw the cold, calculating engineer who had meticulously dismantled his entire life. The color drained completely from his trembling lips as he realized that I had personally choreographed this incredibly devastating public execution in front of his peers. He was utterly destroyed, trapped in a nightmare he had built with his own hands. For 5 excruciating months, I had played the perfect victim, slowly building my invisible trap piece by piece. Now, the predator was finally caught in the bone-crushing steel jaws of the justice I had designed, and I was going to watch him lose everything he cherished. The FBI tactical team, waiting quietly in the hidden service corridor, was about to make their grand finale entrance. The grand ballroom's heavy weight of silence finally broke, shattering into chaotic fragments. Derek tore his terrified gaze away from my unyielding stare. He wheezed violently, his chest heaving, his constructed reality dissolved into a devastating nightmare. He staggered backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping awkwardly on the polished mahogany stage. He knocked over the wooden lectern, and the metal microphone smashed onto the floor, emitting a deafening digital screech that forced guests to cover their ears. "This is a deepfake," Derek screamed, his voice breaking with the hysteria of pure panic. His hands waved frantically, pointing madly at the blank projection screen above him. "This is a sophisticated, fabricated lie. My father suffers from severe dementia. He is clinically insane. He hired tech technicians to manufacture this horrific video to destroy my professional reputation. Do not believe a single second of what was on that recording. It is all a desperate hallucination. But his frantic denial was met with a room that felt incredibly terrifying and entirely unresponsive. The wealthy investment bankers, corporate executives, and dangerous men from the syndicate didn't offer him a single nod of comfort. They stared at him with expressions of deep disgust and predatory calculation. They clearly heard the jarring sound of the pills hitting the drain. They heard his cold confession through the hidden microphone. They knew with absolute certainty they were looking at a man who had slaughtered his own mother for financial gain. The realization that he had completely lost the entire room hit Derek like a physical blow. The color drained from his sweat-soaked face. He turned around, his frantic eyes scanning the opulent ballroom wildly, desperately calculating escape routes. The front entrance was blocked by a wall of incredibly angry guests. His only remaining option was the set of double doors leading to the catering kitchen in the back of the venue. Derek leaped off the raised wooden stage, abandoning his elegant facade entirely. He landed heavily on the carpeted floor and immediately began sprinting toward the back of the room like a madman. Rachel let out another piercing scream of pure terror. She hoisted the layers of fabric of her shimmering designer gown, her diamond necklace rattling violently against her chest, desperately scrambling to follow her husband. She stumbled blindly in her towering stilettos, her perfectly styled hair turning into strands of sweat-soaked hair, disheveled across her terrified face. "Wait," Rachel sobbed hysterically, her shrill voice echoing amidst the chaotic din of the massive crowd. "Derek, don't leave me here. Wait for me." The 300 wealthy guests practically tripped over themselves, rapidly clearing a path, dodging the fleeing couple with extreme revulsion as if they were infected with a highly contagious disease. Nobody reached out to help them. Nobody offered a word of comfort. They simply parted like the Red Sea, leaving behind a wide, empty corridor of absolute disgrace leading straight to the kitchen service doors. I watched their desperate flight with cold, structural calm. I pushed my chair away from the VIP table and stood up. My posture was completely rigid, my spine aligned, radiating an undeniable, heavy majesty. I walked across the floor with intent, the sound of my steady footsteps penetrating clearly through the panicked crowd. I reached the fallen lectern and bent down with incredibly smooth precision, picking up the metal microphone. I tapped the heavy mesh head twice. The sharp asterisk thud-thud echoed thunderously through the massive speakers, commanding the absolute attention of everyone in the room. The chaotic shouting and angry murmurs died down, replaced by a tense silence heavier than lead. I looked across the vast ocean of faces in front of me and finally spoke. My voice was deep, incredibly steady, completely stripped of the manufactured, fragile facade I had displayed for the past 5 months. "What you just saw on the screen was not a digital fabrication," I announced levelly, truth echoing with absolute clarity. That was the brutal reality of the final moments of my beautiful wife's life on this earth. But their murderous ambition didn't end with her tragic passing. For 5 months, Derek and Rachel have been systematically poisoning me in my own home, serving me herbal tea laced with high concentrations of sedatives every day to mimic the symptoms of late-stage cognitive decline. I reached into the inside pocket of my charcoal tuxedo and pulled out the thick toxicology report I had obtained from the analytical lab. I held the damning medical document high so everyone in the grand ballroom could clearly see it. "This is a comprehensive toxicology screening conducted by an independent laboratory this afternoon," I declared coldly, my voice cutting through the heavy air like a sharpened steel blade. "It proves absolutely that the tea they prepared for me contained massive, highly lethal concentrations of a heavy metal compound known as thallium. It is a tasteless, odorless poison clearly designed to slowly destroy the central nervous system and trigger sudden, catastrophic cardiac arrest. They murdered Martha to accelerate the execution of a massive legal trust, and they were actively preparing to take me out this week to secretly pay off $15 million in offshore gambling debts. A sharp, incredibly intense gasp erupted from the crowd. The dangerous men in the syndicate exchanged dark, lethal glances, their hands sliding unobtrusively beneath their tailored suit jackets. Derek had almost reached the heavy double doors of the kitchen, his hand reaching out to push the brass handle, his desperate brain thinking only of ensuring his immediate escape into the labyrinth of service corridors. He shoved the right door with all the strength he had left, throwing the weight of his body forward into the shadows he thought were safe. The heavy wooden door swung inward, but Derek didn't manage to take even a single step forward. He smashed violently into a wall of black, tactical armor. A dozen high-powered flashlights emitted blindingly bright beams, instantly cutting through the dim light, illuminating his sweat-soaked, terrified face. A fully armed FBI tactical team, wearing dark Kevlar vests with bright yellow letters clearly printed on them, completely sealed the entire threshold of the kitchen. They moved with terrifying, well-trained, highly efficient precision, immediately advancing into the grand ballroom and forming an impenetrable, heavily guarded barricade in front of the only viable exit. Rachel crashed heavily into Derek's back, letting out a suffocating scream as the imposing federal agents systematically raised their weapons, their faces obscured by dark tactical helmets and ballistic visors. From the absolute center of the federal formation, a familiar, impeccably dressed figure stepped forward, walking into the warm light of the crystal chandeliers. Gregory Barnes, my ruthless estate lawyer, adjusted the lapels of his flawless black suit casually, his predatory eyes locked directly onto my trembling son. Gregory held a thick, official federal arrest warrant firmly in his right hand. I watched from the front of the stage, my face a perfect, cold, calculating mask of triumph. I lowered the metal microphone and gave my son a dark, utterly merciless smile. The invisible trap we had meticulously constructed finally slammed shut with bone-crushing force. There was absolutely no possibility of escape here. The heavy silence of the grand ballroom shattered into absolute chaos the second the federal agents crossed the threshold. The fully armed tactical team operated with terrifying, well-trained efficiency. They didn't shout commands, nor did they wave their weapons wildly at the panicked guests. Instead, they moved in a tight, focused formation directly toward the stage, the heavy thud of their boots on the polished wooden floor sounding in incredibly uniform unison. The high society crowd scrambled frantically to clear a path, knocking over crystal champagne flutes and opulent floral arrangements, desperately dodging the advancing federal tide. Derek stood completely frozen at the edge of the stage. His initial instinct to flee had completely evaporated, entirely replaced by the crushing, suffocating weight of the reality he couldn't escape. He stared at the approaching dark uniforms with wide, unblinking eyes, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. Two burly federal agents rushed to the front of the stage, crossing the wooden steps with shocking speed. Before my son could even react to their approach, they grabbed the shoulders of his tailored tuxedo and violently slammed him face first directly onto the nearest silk-draped banquet table. The impact sent expensive silverware and fine porcelain clattering to the floor. Derek let out a sharp, breathless gasp as the agent's heavy weight pinned him firmly against the white silk tablecloth. His arms were brutally twisted behind his back. The clear, cold, metallic ratcheting sound of heavy, high-grade steel handcuffs locking tight echoed jarringly above the confused murmurs of the shocked audience. Derek Caldwell, the lead agent announced, his deep, booming baritone effortlessly drowning out the sound of the entire massive room. You are officially under arrest by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are formally charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and federal wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The horrific magnitude of the charges washed over the opulent ballroom like a cold tide. First-degree murder. The whispered words rippled rapidly through the crowd of wealthy investment bankers and corporate executives. They stared at the man they had just been celebrating, their expressions twisting from initial confusion into deep, visceral revulsion. The meticulously constructed, flawless image that Derek had spent years building was being mercilessly dismantled piece by piece in front of his entire professional network. Suddenly, a piercing, hysterical scream tore through the heavy air. Rachel had managed to scramble some distance away from the tactical team sealing the kitchen door, but her flight was incredibly short-lived. Two female federal agents intercepted her rapidly, grabbing her bare arms and turning her around. Rachel fought them frantically, her layers of shimmering designer gown tangled around her legs, struggling desperately in their iron-fisted grip. "I didn't do anything," Rachel screamed, her voice breaking with raw, pure panic. Her perfectly styled hair turned into matted, sweat-soaked strands stuck to her face, completely ruining her flawless aristocratic image. She twisted her neck frantically, terrified eyes staring straight at Derek, who was still pinned firmly to the banquet table. "It was all his idea," she howled, pointing a trembling finger straight at her husband. "He forced me to do it. He told me if I didn't help him with the meds, he'd leave me with nothing. He's a monster. He's a degenerate gambler. You have to believe me. I'm the victim." Her desperate, pathetic betrayal was instant and absolute. The moment her own freedom was directly threatened, she didn't hesitate to throw the man she allegedly loved straight to the wolves. Derek turned his head slightly against the pressed silk tablecloth, staring at his screaming wife with a look of utterly shattered disbelief. The federal agents completely ignored her hysterical performance. They crisply twisted her arms behind her back and clamped a matching pair of steel handcuffs onto her slender wrists. She continued to sob loudly, her fake tears completely replaced by the real, ugly wailing of a cornered criminal, realizing her stolen, opulent life was ending forever. As the agents secured the prisoners, Gregory Barnes walked calmly onto the wooden stage. My seasoned lawyer moved with the slow, composed grace of a veteran predator circling captured prey. He picked up the discarded metal microphone from the floor smoothly, dusted off the mesh head, and turned to face the mesmerized, horrified audience. Gregory's sharp gaze swept slowly across the room, deliberately lingering on the dark, quiet table occupied by the dangerous men representing the underground syndicate. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gregory announced, his low voice projecting a cold, unshakable authority, "I apologize for the sudden interruption of this evening's festivities. However, the exact nature of these events unfolding before you must be clarified. The $5 million wire transfer executed earlier today by Mr. Derek Caldwell was not a brilliant corporate investment. It was a highly orchestrated, closely monitored federal honeypot operation." Gregory paused, letting the devastating truth sink fully into the audience's brains. The specific account Mr. Caldwell accessed was a restricted federal honeypot. Gregory continued, his words landing like a physical blow. He intentionally routed those funds to an unverified offshore entity in a desperate attempt to cover his massive illegal gambling debts. And by doing so, he provided the FBI with incredibly precise digital blueprints of his illegal financial network. At this exact moment, all offshore accounts linked to that fraudulent transfer have been completely frozen and seized by international authorities. I watched the members of the syndicate at the adjacent table closely. Their cold, calculating eyes widened slightly at the sudden, terrifying realization. Their posture shifted instantly from relaxed arrogance to tense, dangerous panic. They realized that Derek hadn't just failed to pay them the $15 million. He had actively led a massive federal task force straight to their hidden financial infrastructure. They hadn't just lost their money. Their entire clandestine operation was now in irreparable ruin. Their gazes locked onto Derek, radiating an invisible, lethal promise of future violence. Gregory lowered the microphone and signaled for the tactical team to proceed. The lead agent grabbed Derek by the back of his tuxedo jacket and hauled him roughly off the table. They began escorting him through the grand ballroom, forcing him to walk the long, humiliating road toward the main exit. The crowd parted silently, refusing to make eye contact with the disgraced murderer. As they dragged Derek forcibly past my VIP table, his legs suddenly went limp. The overwhelming terror of his situation completely broke his spirit. He dropped heavily to both knees on the thick carpet, pulling the weight of the federal agent slightly lower as well. He looked up at me, his face filled with real, terrified tears. The arrogant, untouchable investment banker was gone, entirely replaced by a broken, sobbing coward. He realized his entire life was now officially and permanently over. He opened his trembling mouth, begging me for the kind of mercy he hadn't given Martha. "Dad, please, the syndicate will kill me in prison. You have to save me. I'm your son." I looked down at this pathetic man kneeling on the thick carpet. He was shaking violently, his tailored tuxedo completely ruined by the reality of his arrest. The tears running down his face weren't out of remorse for the mother he murdered, nor out of guilt for the pain he caused our family. Those were the terrified tears of a cornered narcissist realizing he had been reduced to prey. He begged me to save him, his voice cracking desperately, calling out to the sacred family bond he had gleefully shattered 5 months ago. I stood above him, feeling a deep void. There was no massive surge of victorious joy in my chest, nor did I explode with rage. I didn't raise my voice to scream at him. I didn't clench my fists to strike his face. He wasn't worth the expenditure of my anger. The toxic fury that had sustained me through 5 months of playing the frail, victimized old man had evaporated entirely, leaving behind only icy resolve. I saw him for what he was, a hollow shell entirely driven by greed. The federal agents pinned him firmly. Gregory stood silently to the side, watching our meticulously orchestrated endgame. The entire grand ballroom held its collective breath, anticipating a dramatic, explosive confrontation. Instead, I bent my knees, lowering my rigid body until my face was only inches from Derek's terrified features. He leaned forward eagerly, a pathetic glimmer of false hope flickering in his eyes, foolishly believing that the unconditional love of a father could somehow override the cold, hard fact of premeditated murder. I stared deep into his eyes, searching for any lingering trace of the little boy I used to hold in my arms. There was absolutely nothing there. Emptiness looked back at me. I let out a slow, even breath, feeling the absolute finality of the moment. "I'm just a confused old man, Derek," I whispered, ensuring the chilling words reached only his ears. "I don't know who you are." The glimmer of desperate hope vanished instantly from his pale face, replaced by a look of incomprehensible horror. His jaw dropped, but no sound escaped. He finally understood the absolute perfection of the trap. I had used his own arrogant words against him, the exact words he had spoken in the study when he thought I was too weak and heavily sedated to perceive his lethal ambition. I straightened my posture completely, broke eye contact, and turned away from the man who once shared my name. "No," Derek screamed suddenly, the sound tearing from his throat with animalistic desperation. "Dad, please don't go. You can't just leave me here. They'll kill me." I ignored his frantic cries entirely. I began walking toward the main exit of the grand ballroom. My steps were heavy and composed, completely undisturbed by the chaos unfolding directly behind me. The crowd of wealthy guests, corporate executives, and stunned socialites parted silently, their faces reflecting a deep mix of shock and unspoken awe as I approached. Nobody dared say a word. The dangerous men representing the underground crime syndicate sat frozen at their tables, their cold eyes tracking my departure, fully aware of the sheer scale of the federal trap that had just decimated their illegal empire. I pushed open the heavy glass revolving doors of the luxury hotel and stepped out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped completely, and the dark city streets were slick and clean. The bright neon lights of the financial district reflected vividly in the puddles on the sidewalk. For the first time in 5 excruciating months, I drew a deep breath of unburdened air. I wasn't slumping my shoulders. I wasn't dragging my feet. I stood straight. The oppressive weight that had been brought on by my manufactured frailty was erased from my weary bones forever. Behind me, the dull siren of approaching police cars began to wail in the distance. It was the perfect soundtrack for the final destruction of Derek's stolen world. The legal aftermath was swift and absolutely ruthless. Federal prosecutors offered no lenient plea deals or quiet out-of-court settlements. The evidence we meticulously collected was simply too overwhelming, too completely irrefutable to permit any form of judicial mercy. The digital confession recorded by Martha's smart glasses, combined with the comprehensive toxicology report for the poisoned tea and the documented financial fraud, built an ironclad case. Derek and Rachel had counted on using my massive family trust to hire the most aggressive, expensive defense attorneys in the country. They fully expected to drown the judicial system in endless litigation. However, because Gregory and I had professionally frozen and seized every one of their financial assets hours before the gala, they were left completely penniless. They were stripped entirely of the ill-gotten gains from their cold-blooded murder. Without my money to fund a sophisticated defense, their high-priced legal representation evaporated overnight. They were completely abandoned by their wealthy social circle, immediately viewed as toxic pariahs by the very peers who had toasted their success just days prior. The trial was brief, clinical, and devastating. The prosecution played the horrific video of the final moments of Martha's life directly for the jury. The absolute cruelty of Rachel dumping the life-saving medication into the kitchen sink, combined with the footage of Derek whispering his murderous intent, sealed their fate in a matter of hours. Jury deliberations didn't even last an afternoon. When the final verdict was read, there were no dramatic courtroom outbursts, only the heavy, satisfying strike of the judge's gavel. Derek and Rachel were both sentenced to consecutive life terms in a maximum security federal prison, with absolutely no possibility of parole. They would spend the remainder of their pathetic lives in concrete cells, forever deprived of designer clothing, stolen luxury, and their arrogant freedom. The underground crime syndicate fared no better. The $5 million wire transfer Derek had executed into my isolated, monitored honeypot account provided the FBI with the precise digital key that instantly unlocked the entire criminal network. Utilizing meticulously recorded transaction logs, tactical teams systematically tracked, froze, and seized dozens of hidden offshore accounts. The dangerous men who had confidently attended the gala to collect their protection money were subjected to a violent manhunt and mass arrests within weeks. Their massive, violent empire was completely dismantled, and their illegal assets were permanently forfeited by the government, effectively eliminating the immediate threat they posed. Now I sit alone in the quiet warmth of my study, looking at the framed photo of Martha on my mahogany desk. The heavy, suffocating darkness that had shrouded my life for the past year finally began to recede, replaced by a quiet, enduring peace. The house is quiet, but it no longer feels completely empty. I honored her beautiful memory in the only way that truly mattered. I protected the legacy we built together, ensuring the monsters who took her faced the absolute maximum penalty for their crimes. I survived the darkest storm imaginable, standing taller than ever, completely unburdened by the shadows of the past. The trap has closed. The board has been cleared, and cold, absolute justice has finally been served. 6 months have passed, and the world finally corrected its axis with rapid, ruthless momentum. The oppressive winter has completely surrendered to a bright, vibrant spring, reflecting the profound transformation in my own existence. I stand quietly in the brilliant morning light, looking up at the sleek, towering glass facade of the newly expanded Chicago Medical Center. The crisp, cool breeze gently brushes against the lapels of my dark suit, but I feel absolutely no chill. I feel only a deep, radiating warmth that anchors my soul to the ground. Today is the culmination of everything I fought to protect. A small crowd of hospital administrators, top cardiovascular surgeons, and dedicated medical staff gathered with reverence around a polished marble lectern near the main entrance. A deep red, wide silk ribbon was stretched across the gleaming automatic doors. Standing to my right is Gregory, my steadfast lawyer, holding a leather folder containing the final trust documents. We successfully liquidated that massive $40 million family fund, permanently removing it from the greedy, blood-stained clutches of my disgraced son. Every penny of that vast fortune was meticulously redirected into this massive philanthropic endeavor. The hospital president stepped forward and adjusted the microphone. He spoke passionately about how this state-of-the-art facility would save countless lives, detailing the advanced surgical suites and groundbreaking research labs that are now fully operational. He spoke of the unparalleled generosity that made this ambitious vision a tangible reality. But as the applause rippled through the crowd with reverence, my attention wasn't focused on the accolades. My eyes were locked entirely on the heavy bronze plaque that was firmly secured to the polished granite wall beside the entrance. Martha Caldwell Cardiology Wing. The golden letters shone perfectly in the morning light. I reached out and gently stroked the contours of my beautiful wife's engraved name. A profound, overwhelming sense of completion washed over my entire being. Martha suffered unimaginable agony in the final moments of her life, betrayed by the people she nurtured and loved. Her failing heart was cold-bloodedly ignored for the sake of a horrific inheritance. Now her immortal name will be forever associated with healing, essential medical intervention, and the protection of human life. I smiled softly, feeling a genuine expression of peace I hadn't felt in over a year. The legacy we built together is finally safe, beyond the reach of greedy, corrupt hands ever again. I picked up the golden scissors the president handed to me and cut the deep red ribbon with a clean, sharp motion. The crowd erupted in genuine, heartfelt applause. The wing is officially open. The dark shadows of Derek's horrific crimes have been permanently eclipsed by this monument of immortal light. After the short reception, I politely declined Gregory's offer for a ride, choosing to walk the 2 miles back to my estate. The physical exertion felt incredibly good. My legs, which I had forced to drag and shuffle for 5 excruciating months, now moved with a long, powerful, and deliberate stride. My spine remained perfectly straight. My breathing was deep and rhythmic, inhaling the clean, uncontaminated air of this city. The sense of physical frailty I had so carefully feigned has completely vanished, replaced by a robust, undeniable vitality that completely defied my age. I turned onto that quiet, tree-lined street, and the familiar silhouette of my massive stone house came into view. As I unlocked the heavy oak front door and stepped into the grand foyer, the instant silence of the empty house greeted me. But this was no longer the suffocating, tense silence that harbored dangerous predators. This was a clean, honest, and deeply comforting quiet. The toxic presence of Derek and Rachel has been completely eradicated from these walls, scrubbed clean by the absolute finality of their federal convictions. I walked slowly through the spacious living room, letting my fingertips slide across the polished mahogany furniture. I walked toward the sunny corner near the floor-to-ceiling windows. The ugly, drooping Boston fern that once served as the secret grave for my daily dose of toxic medication was completely gone. Months ago, I had personally bagged the contaminated soil and tossed the heavy ceramic pot into the municipal trash bin. In its place was a vibrant, thriving white orchid, its delicate petals blooming beautifully in the natural light. It was Martha's favorite flower, a living testament to her eternal presence in this home. I continued into the kitchen, the very same room where Derek coldly watched his mother take her final breath. The horrific echoes of that day have been systematically replaced by the quiet, mundane rhythm of a new beginning. I filled the copper kettle with fresh, filtered water and placed it on the gas stove. I ignited the burner, watching the bright blue flame roar to life. I opened the wooden pantry and took out a box of simple, no-brand chamomile tea. I didn't need to check what was inside. I didn't need to sneakily pour the liquid into the roots of a dying houseplant. The kettle's sharp whistle broke the tranquility. I poured the boiling water into a porcelain cup, watching the golden liquid steep perfectly. I picked up the warm mug and took a slow, long sip. It tasted pure, soothing, and absolutely safe. I carried the tea into the master study and sat down in my heavy leather armchair. I looked out the window at the manicured back lawn, feeling that sharp, unclouded clarity in my own brain. My cognitive function is sharp as a knife. My body is healthy, strong, and completely free of the heavy metal toxins that almost ended my life. I looked straight into the terrifying abyss of my own family's betrayal, and I came out with a complete victory. The board wasn't just cleared, it was completely rebuilt on my uncompromising terms. I closed my eyes, letting the warm sunlight wash over my face. I could almost feel Martha's gentle hand resting reassuringly on my shoulder. Her soul, long restless due to the cruel injustice of her passing, was finally at peace. The monsters were locked in concrete cages, and her beautiful name was permanently etched in bronze, saving lives every single day. The war is officially over, and this enduring tranquility in my home is the ultimate echo of victory. The hardest lesson a parent can learn is that the unconditional love we provide our children isn't always reciprocated. We spend our entire lives building a legacy to protect them, only to realize that sometimes we are the ones who need protection from our own flesh and blood. Trust is a beautiful thing, but blind trust is a dangerous weakness. Never ignore your intuition, and never let family ties blind you to the truth of someone's actions. True wealth isn't the money you leave behind. It's the integrity, honor, and dignity you choose to live your life by. Have you ever experienced a shocking betrayal from someone you completely trusted? How did you find the strength to fight back? Share your story in the comments below. Like, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next life-changing story. Oh yes, I once rode on your shoulders and thought you could touch the sky. Every path felt less uncertain whenever I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. When the winter winds came blowing, you stood between the wind and mine. Time keeps on flowing like a river, and the years keep on drifting to the sea. But no matter where life takes me, you'll always be a part of me. I am my father's daughter. In every step I take, in every time I choose to stand and not bow, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire in my soul. Though the years keep on passing, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength isn't in power, but in kindness during the hardest times. You taught me how to keep moving when the road grew cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh by the campfire echoes within me like a ghost, softly calling out my name. When I face my biggest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, "Child, you're stronger than you know." I am my Father's daughter. In every step I take, in every time I choose to stand and not bow. I carry your courage in my heart, your fire in my soul. Though the years keep on passing, your love still leads me home. One day the white snow will cover the footprints. One day the fire will burn away. But the thing a father gives his daughter is a thing that will never fade. Not the money, not the stories, nor the battles he has won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she became. I am my Father's daughter, and I always will be. Through every victory, every loss, through every joy, every pain. The world around me might change. The stars above might fade. But I will always carry with me my Father's endless love. When they ask me who I am, I'll smile and softly say, I am my Father's daughter, I am.